Hi everyone, welcome to Ricktopus. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Rick and Morty examines intelligence in forms that go far beyond solving equations or building portals. While Rick Sanchez dominates as the smartest man in the universe, characters like Evil Morty, Unity, Zeep Xanflorp, and members of the Smith family demonstrate that intelligence comes in many shapes, from strategic manipulation to collective consciousness to emotional awareness, and each type plays a crucial role in how the multiverse functions and how the show's narrative unfolds across its many seasons. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Rick C-137, the smartest man in the universe. Rick Sanchez stands at the center of everything in Rick and Morty, and his intelligence isn't just a character trait, it's the foundation the entire show is built on. From the first episode, the series makes it clear that Rick exists on a level of genius that most people can't comprehend. He builds portals to other dimensions in his garage. He creates devices that break fundamental laws of physics. He treats the multiverse like his personal playground, and he does all of this while drunk, depressed, and actively self-destructing. The show never questions whether Rick is smart. It questions what that level of intelligence does to a person when they can see every possible outcome and know that nothing really matters in the grand scheme of infinite realities. When Rick first appears in the pilot episode, he's dragging Morty out of bed in the middle of the night to help him test a neutrino bomb. This isn't a normal grandfather. This is someone who casually discusses destroying all life on Earth while explaining the science behind it to his terrified teenage grandson. The bomb doesn't go off, and the scene establishes something important. Rick's intelligence lets him do almost anything he wants. And the only thing stopping him from following through on his worst impulses is his complicated relationship with his family. He's brilliant enough to end the world, and he's also brilliant enough to know that doing so would hurt the few people he still cares about, even if he won't admit he cares. Throughout the series, Rick demonstrates his genius in ways that go beyond just inventing things. He understands dimensional physics well enough to travel between infinite versions of reality. He's mastered biology to the point where he can turn himself into a pickle and build a functional body out of rat parts. He's outsmarted entire governments, alien civilizations, and even cosmic entities that exist beyond normal comprehension. In the episode The Rick Shank Rickdemption, Rick escapes from maximum security prison inside the Galactic Federation by transferring his consciousness between bodies, collapsing the entire Federation's economy, and tricking both the Federation and the Council of Ricks at the same time. This isn't just smart, this is operating on a level where you're always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, even when they think they've captured you. The way Rick escapes from the Galactic Federation prison shows how his intelligence works in practice. The Federation has him trapped in a mental prison where they're trying to extract the formula for interdimensional travel from his memories. Rick realizes that he's inside a simulation designed to look like his memories, so he pretends to cooperate while actually feeding false information to his captors. He transfers his consciousness into the body of a Federation agent, then uses that agent's access to download his consciousness into multiple bodies throughout the facility. By the end of the episode, Rick has destroyed the Galactic Federation's economy by changing their currency value to 0, which causes their entire government to collapse. He does all of this while making it look like an accident. What makes Rick's intelligence even more impressive is that other characters in the show constantly acknowledge it. The Galactic Federation considers him their most wanted criminal, specifically because his mind is so dangerous. The Council of Ricks, which is made up entirely of versions of Rick from different dimensions, recognizes Rick C-137 as exceptional, even among infinite Ricks. When the show introduces the central finite curve in later seasons, we learn that Rick literally designed a section of the multiverse where he's guaranteed to be the smartest person in every reality. He didn't just become the smartest man in the universe, he engineered reality itself to make sure that would always be true. Rick's scientific achievements go beyond anything most characters in the show can understand. He's created devices that can freeze time, erase memories, split timelines, and even create miniature universes that generate power for his car battery. In the episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy, Rick reveals that his car battery is actually a miniature universe called the Microverse, where an entire civilization exists solely to generate electricity for him. Inside that universe, a scientist named Zeep Xanflorp creates his own miniature universe for the same purpose, which means Rick's technology inspired someone else to replicate it on a smaller scale. When Rick Rick discovers this, he's not impressed. He's annoyed that someone figured out his design, which shows how far ahead of everyone else he operates. The Microverse episode reveals something interesting about how Rick thinks about his own intelligence. When Rick, Morty, and Summer enter the Microverse to fix the battery, they discover that the inhabitants have no idea they're living inside a battery. Zeep Xanflorp, who's the smartest scientist in the Microverse, eventually figures out that his universe was created by someone else, and this realization leads to a confrontation with Rick. The two scientists are evenly matched in terms of intelligence, and they end up in a physical fight because neither one can outsmart the other. Rick can't handle the idea that someone else might be as smart as he is, even if that person only exists because Rick created their universe in the first place. The show also uses Rick's intelligence to explore what happens when someone is too smart for their own good. Rick's genius comes with severe emotional consequences. He's deeply depressed, chronically alcoholic, and constantly suicidal because he understands the multiverse well enough to know that nothing he does ultimately matters. In the episode Autoerotic Assimilation, Rick attempts suicide after his ex-girlfriend Unity leaves him, and the scene is played completely straight. There's no joke. There's no punchline. The show just shows Rick at his lowest point, lying in his garage, trying to vaporize himself with a laser because his intelligence has made him too aware of how meaningless existence is. This is what separates Rick from other genius characters in fiction. His intelligence doesn't make him heroic or aspirational. It makes him miserable. The suicide scene happens after Unity decides that her relationship with Rick is too destructive for both of them. Unity leaves him a note explaining that she needs to get away before they destroy each other. Rick reads the note, gets drunk, and then goes to his garage where he's built a laser device. He puts his head under the laser and activates it, and at the last second, Rick passes out from the alcohol and the laser misses him. The show doesn't present this as Rick being saved. It presents it as Rick being too drunk to even successfully kill himself. Rick's relationship with Morty also reveals something important about his intelligence. Morty isn't smart in the traditional sense. He struggles in school, he's socially awkward, and he doesn't understand most of what Rick tells him about science. Rick keeps Morty around anyway, and the show eventually explains why. In the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, we learn that Morty's brainwaves can camouflage Rick's genius, making it harder for other Ricks to track him. Beyond that practical reason, Rick clearly values Morty's presence, even if he won't admit it. Morty represents something Rick can't create with technology: genuine human connection. Rick can build anything, solve any problem, and manipulate reality itself, and he can't engineer away his loneliness. His intelligence isolates him from everyone, and Morty is one of the few people who stays with him despite knowing how dangerous and self-destructive he is. The relationship between Rick and Morty gets more complicated as the series continues. In early episodes, Rick treats Morty like a tool or a sidekick. As the show progresses, it becomes clear that Rick actually depends on Morty emotionally, even though Rick would never admit this out loud. In the episode The Vat of Acid episode, Rick goes to extreme lengths to prove a point to Morty about one of his inventions. The entire episode is essentially Rick throwing a tantrum because Morty questioned one of his ideas, and Rick's need to prove he's right ends up putting Morty through severe emotional trauma. This shows that Rick's intelligence doesn't help him be a better person or a better grandfather, it just gives him more elaborate ways to hurt the people around him. Rick's intelligence also shapes how the show handles morality. Because Rick is smart enough to see infinite possibilities across infinite dimensions, he operates with a moral framework that most people would consider nihilistic. When characters die in Rick and Morty, Rick often replaces them with versions from other dimensions. When he destroys entire civilizations, he justifies it by pointing out that infinite versions of those civilizations exist elsewhere. The show doesn't present this as wisdom. It presents it as what happens when someone's intelligence removes their ability to care about consequences. Rick understands everything, and that understanding has made him cruel. The clearest example of this comes in the episode Rick Potion number 9, where Rick creates a love potion for Morty that accidentally turns everyone on Earth into mutant creatures. Rick and Morty can't fix the problem, so Rick's solution is to find a dimension where different versions of themselves managed to fix the problem and then died immediately afterward. Rick and Morty bury their own dead bodies in the backyard and take over the lives of their alternate selves. For Rick, this is just a practical solution to an unsolvable problem. For Morty, this is traumatic and horrifying. This is what Rick's intelligence has done to his sense of morality. He can solve almost any problem by jumping to a different dimension, so he never has to live with the consequences of his actions. The show continues to build on Rick's intelligence throughout its run. In Season 5, we learn more about how the central finite curve works and how Rick created it. The central finite curve is a section of the multiverse where Rick is always the smartest person in every reality. This means Rick literally edited reality to guarantee his own superiority, which is both impressive and deeply insecure. He didn't just want to be smart, he wanted to be the smartest. And he was willing to cut off entire sections of the multiverse to make sure no one could challenge him. This reveals something important about Rick's character. His intelligence isn't just a gift, it's an obsession. And maintaining his status as the smartest person alive matters more to him than almost anything else. Rick's genius also extends to his understanding of people. He's not just scientifically intelligent, he's emotionally manipulative when he wants to be. In the episode Pickle Rick, Rick transforms himself into a pickle specifically to avoid going to family therapy, then builds an elaborate action sequence out of his escape. When he finally shows up to therapy, the therapist calls him out for using his intelligence as a defense mechanism. She tells him that he could choose to solve his emotional problems, and instead, he uses his genius to avoid dealing with them. This scene shows that Rick's intelligence isn't actually helping him live a better life. It's helping him run away from the things that make him uncomfortable. The therapist's speech to Rick is one of the most direct critiques of his character in the entire series. She tells Rick that intelligence isn't the same as wisdom or emotional maturity, and that his ability to solve complex scientific problems doesn't mean he knows how to handle relationships or feelings. She points out that Rick uses his genius as an excuse to avoid personal growth, because as long as he's focused on building impossible devices and going on dangerous adventures, he doesn't have to think about why he's unhappy or why he can't connect with his family. Rick sits there and listens to all of this, and the show makes it clear that he understands exactly what she's saying. He just doesn't care enough to change. The show also explores how Rick's intelligence affects other people. Beth idolizes her father because she sees his genius as proof that he's special, and she spent her entire life trying to earn his approval. Summer initially sees Rick as an escape from her boring teenage life, and gradually realizes that Rick's adventures come with serious consequences. Morty suffers the most because he's forced to witness Rick's brilliance while dealing with the trauma that comes from their dangerous adventures. Rick's intelligence doesn't make life better for the people around him. It makes life more complicated, more dangerous, and more emotionally damaging. Rick's status as the smartest man in the universe is the baseline for understanding intelligence in Rick and Morty. Every other smart character in the show is measured against Rick, and most of them fall short. The show doesn't present Rick's intelligence as something to aspire to. Instead, it presents his genius as a burden that's destroyed his ability to connect with other people, find meaning in existence, or experience genuine happiness. Rick can do anything except the one thing he actually wants, which is to feel like his life matters. His intelligence has given him everything except peace, and that's what makes his character so tragic and so central to understanding how the show thinks about what it means to be smart. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Raw scientific genius isn't the only form of intelligence that matters in the multiverse, and one character proved that strategic thinking and emotional manipulation can rival even Rick's technological mastery. Section 2. Evil Morty. Strategy and manipulation. Evil Morty represents something Rick and Morty spent years building toward. A character who could challenge Rick not through superior technology, through superior planning. Evil Morty isn't smarter than Rick in the traditional sense. He can't build portals or create miniature universes. He understands people, systems, and long-term strategy in ways that even Rick struggles with, and that makes him one of the most dangerous characters in the entire series. While Rick operates through chaos and improvisation, Evil Morty operates through careful manipulation and patience, and by the time people realize what he's doing, it's already too late to stop him. Evil Morty first appears in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, though the show doesn't reveal his true identity until the end. The episode starts with Ricks from across the multiverse getting murdered, and the Council of Ricks accuses Rick C-137 of being responsible. Rick gets arrested and taken to the Citadel, which is a massive space station where Ricks from different dimensions have created their own government. While Rick is being interrogated, the real killer is revealed to be a Rick who's being controlled by his own Morty through a device hidden in his eye patch. This Morty has been using his Rick as a puppet to murder other Ricks and frame Rick C-137 for the crimes. When the plan falls apart, evil Morty escapes into the crowd of other Mortys, disappearing without anyone knowing who he is. What makes this introduction so important is that it establishes evil Morty as a character who thinks differently from everyone else. Most Mortys in the show are portrayed as scared, unintelligent, and completely dependent on their Ricks. The Citadel even has a system where Mortys are assigned to Ricks like tools, with no consideration for what the Mortys actually want. Evil Morty looked at this system and decided to break it. Not by fighting openly, by manipulating it from within. He killed Ricks without anyone suspecting a Morty could be responsible, because the entire society is built on the assumption that Mortys are too stupid and too powerless to pose a threat. Evil Morty used that assumption against them. The way Evil Morty controlled his Rick demonstrates a level of technical knowledge that most Mortys shouldn't possess. He built a device capable of overriding a Rick's motor functions and higher brain processes, while keeping the Rick's scientific abilities intact. This means Evil Morty understood neuroscience and cybernetics well enough to hack into a genius-level brain without destroying the intelligence he needed to access. He essentially turned Rick into a biological computer that he could program. And he did this without any of the resources or education that Ricks have. This suggests that Evil Morty's intelligence isn't just about planning. He's also technically capable in ways the show doesn't fully explain, which makes him even more mysterious and threatening. Evil Morty doesn't appear again until Season 3's The Ricklantis Mix-Up, which takes place entirely within the Citadel and follows various Ricks and Mortys living in their society. The episode presents itself as an anthology of different stories, showing how the Citadel functions as a city with its own economy, police force, and political system. One of the storylines follows a Morty who's running for president of the Citadel on a campaign of change and reform. He presents himself as a simple Morty who wants to make life better for other Mortys, and he promises to challenge the Ricks who control everything. The episode ends with this Morty winning the election. And only in the final moments does the show reveal that he's the same Morty from Season 1. He's been hiding in plain sight for years, working his way up through the political system, and now he controls the most powerful organization in the multiverse. This is where Evil Morty's strategic intelligence becomes clear. He didn't try to overthrow the Citadel through violence. He didn't challenge Rick directly. Instead, he played the long game, understanding that the best way to gain power was to make people think he was harmless. He ran a political campaign based on appealing to other Mortys who felt oppressed by the Ricks, and he won because he understood something fundamental about how the Citadel worked. The Ricks were so confident in their own superiority that they couldn't imagine a Morty actually being smart enough to manipulate them. Evil Morty exploited that blind spot perfectly. The campaign itself shows Evil Morty's understanding of political manipulation. He crafted a message that resonated with the oppressed Morty population, while not threatening the Ricks enough to make them take him seriously as a danger. He positioned himself as a reformer rather than a revolutionary, which allowed him to gain institutional power without triggering the defensive mechanisms that would have stopped a more obviously threatening candidate. He understood that the Citadel's power structure depended on Mortys believing they had some agency, while actually keeping them powerless. And he used that contradiction to present himself as someone who could give Mortys real power within the existing system. The entire campaign was a lie designed to get him into a position where he could destroy everything, and nobody saw through it until it was too late. Once Evil Morty becomes president, he starts consolidating power in ways that show just how carefully he's been planning. In the Season 4 finale, Evil Morty begins quietly eliminating potential threats to his control. He uses his position to access information about the Citadel's infrastructure, history, and weaknesses. He's not interested in ruling the Citadel forever. He's interested in escaping the entire system that the Citadel represents, and he knows he needs absolute control of the Citadel before he can destroy it and leave. Everything he does during his presidency is part of a larger plan that he's been building toward since before his first appearance. The show reveals the full scope of Evil Morty's plan in the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack. This episode finally explains how Rick created the central finite curve and built the Citadel, and it shows Evil Morty systematically taking apart everything Rick constructed. Evil Morty reveals that he's discovered the truth about the central finite curve, which is the barrier Rick created to wall off the section of the multiverse where he's always the smartest person. Evil Morty has been working toward one goal the entire time, which is escape. He doesn't want to defeat Rick. He doesn't want to rule over other Ricks and Mortys. He wants to leave the central finite curve entirely and enter the parts of the multiverse where Rick's intelligence doesn't dominate everything. To accomplish this, Evil Morty needs to destroy the Citadel and break through the central finite curve simultaneously, which requires technology that even Rick hasn't fully developed. So Evil Morty does something that demonstrates his strategic brilliance. He kills thousands of Ricks and Mortys, harvests their portal fluid, and uses their deaths to power a weapon capable of tearing a hole through the central finite curve itself. This is brutal, cold, and ruthlessly efficient. Evil Morty doesn't hesitate or show remorse because he's already calculated that this is the only way to achieve his goal. He's willing to commit mass murder to escape a system he sees as fundamentally oppressive, and he's been planning this genocide since before he even became president. The technical achievement of breaking through the central finite curve can't be understated. Rick designed the central finite curve to be essentially unbreakable from the inside. It's a dimensional barrier that separates infinite realities where Rick is the smartest person from infinite realities where he might not be. Breaking through it requires understanding dimensional physics on the same level as Rick, and finding a power source capable of tearing through a barrier that spans infinite dimensions. Evil Morty figured out that portal fluid, which is the substance that allows interdimensional travel, could be weaponized if concentrated in large enough quantities. He turned the very technology that Rick used to create his prison into the key that could break it open. This shows that Evil Morty doesn't just understand strategy and manipulation. He understands Rick's technology well enough to exploit it in ways Rick never intended. The episode shows Evil Morty executing his plan while Rick C-137 and Morty try to stop him. Rick quickly realizes that he can't stop Evil Morty because Evil Morty understands Rick's technology better than Rick expected. Evil Morty has studied how the Citadel works, how portal travel functions, and how the central finite curve maintains itself. And he's found exploits that Rick didn't think anyone would discover. When Rick tries to shut down Evil Morty's weapon, Evil Morty has already prepared countermeasures. When Rick tries to reason with him, Evil Morty makes it clear that he's not interested in anything Rick has to say. He spent his entire existence being underestimated, and now he's proving that being underestimated was his greatest advantage. Evil Morty's intelligence isn't based on scientific genius. It's based on understanding systems and manipulating them from within. He looked at the central finite curve and saw it for what it really was, which is a prison that Rick built to maintain his own ego. He looked at the Citadel and saw a hierarchy built on the abuse and exploitation of Mortys by Ricks. He looked at Rick himself and saw someone who was so convinced of his own superiority that he couldn't imagine a Morty ever outsmarting him. Evil Morty spent years exploiting these blind spots, and by the time Rick realized what was happening, Evil Morty had already won. The Season 5 finale ends with Evil Morty successfully escaping through the hole he created in the central finite curve. The Citadel is destroyed. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys are dead. Evil Morty walks through a portal into a section of the multiverse that Rick can't follow him to, where infinite realities exist without Rick's influence. The show frames this as a victory for Evil Morty, not because he defeated Rick in combat, because he escaped the system Rick created. He achieved something Rick himself has never done, which is genuinely leave behind everything and start completely fresh in a reality where Rick doesn't matter. What makes Evil Morty's intelligence so impressive is that he succeeded by thinking long-term in a show where most characters react impulsively. Rick improvises constantly, jumping between dimensions and solving problems through brute force and scientific brilliance. Evil Morty planned everything years in advance, moving carefully through a system designed to keep him powerless until he gained enough control to destroy that system entirely. He understood that he couldn't beat Rick through technology, so he beat Rick through patience, manipulation, and strategic thinking. He turned his perceived weakness into his greatest strength, and he did it so effectively that Rick never saw him coming until it was too late. Evil Morty's character also represents a different kind of intelligence that the show hadn't explored before. Rick is smart because he understands science and can build impossible devices. Evil Morty is smart because he understands people and systems. He knows how organizations work, how power structures maintain themselves, and how to exploit the assumptions people make about him. He's emotionally intelligent in ways Rick isn't, which lets him manipulate others without them realizing they're being manipulated. He doesn't need to be the smartest scientist in the room because he's the smartest strategist. And in a show about infinite possibilities, being able to plan across multiple timelines and outcomes is its own form of genius. The show reinforces Evil Morty's intelligence through how other characters react to him. When the Council of Ricks first encounters him in Season 1, they don't take him seriously because he's a Morty. When he becomes president of the Citadel, the Ricks assume he'll be easy to control because they can't imagine a Morty having real power. Even Rick C-137, who's supposed to be the smartest person in the universe, doesn't realize Evil Morty is a threat until Evil Morty has already set his final plan in motion. Evil Morty succeeded specifically because everyone underestimated him, and he made sure they would continue underestimating him until it was too late to stop him. Evil Morty's arc also shows that intelligence in Rick and Morty isn't just about being smart. It's about what you do with that intelligence. Rick uses his genius to avoid dealing with his emotions, maintain his superiority, and keep everyone else at arm's length. Evil Morty uses his intelligence to achieve freedom, even if that means committing terrible acts to get there. The show doesn't present Evil Morty as a hero, and it also doesn't present him as purely villainous. He's someone who was trapped in a system that devalued him, and he used every tool available to escape that system, regardless of the cost. His intelligence gave him the ability to see beyond what the Citadel wanted him to see, and he used that vision to break free. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Individual strategic genius isn't the only form of intelligence that challenges conventional thinking in the multiverse. And one character demonstrates that consciousness itself can be reimagined when thousands of minds think as one. Section 3. Unity. Collective hive intelligence. Unity represents a completely different type of intelligence in Rick and Morty. Unlike Rick's scientific genius or Evil Morty's strategic manipulation, Unity's intelligence comes from being a hive mind that can assimilate entire planets and process the thoughts, experiences, and knowledge of billions of beings simultaneously. Unity doesn't think as an individual. Unity thinks as a collective consciousness that absorbs every mind it touches, combining their memories, skills, and perspectives into one unified intelligence. This makes Unity one of the most unique characters in the show, because the question of how smart Unity is becomes complicated when you're measuring the combined intelligence of thousands or millions of minds working together as one entity. Unity first appears in the Season 2 episode Autoerotic Assimilation, and the episode immediately establishes how Unity's intelligence works. Rick, Morty, and Summer respond to a distress signal from a planet and discover that the entire population is being controlled by Unity, who happens to be Rick's ex-girlfriend. Unity can take over any living being by touching them, and once assimilated, that being becomes part of Unity's collective consciousness. The beings Unity controls still have their own bodies and can perform individual tasks, and they're all connected to Unity's central intelligence. This means Unity can coordinate millions of people to work on different projects simultaneously while maintaining perfect communication between all of them. When Rick reunites with Unity, the episode shows how Unity's hive mind intelligence operates in practice. Unity has taken over an entire planet and is using the population to run society, conduct scientific research, and manage complex systems that would normally require massive bureaucracies and governments. Every person on the planet is Unity, so there are no conflicts, no disagreements, and no communication barriers. Unity can have one body working on medical research, while another body is cooking dinner, while thousands of other bodies are maintaining infrastructure. And all of these tasks are being coordinated by the same consciousness. This is a form of intelligence that goes beyond what any individual could achieve, because Unity has access to the combined knowledge and skills of everyone it assimilates. The way Unity demonstrates intelligence in the episode goes beyond just coordination and multitasking. Unity shows understanding of Rick's personality, preferences, and desires that suggests deep emotional and social intelligence. When Rick arrives on the planet, Unity immediately begins creating scenarios and situations designed specifically to appeal to Rick. Unity organizes elaborate parties, sets up entertainment that matches Rick's sense of humor, and anticipates what Rick wants before Rick even asks for it. This requires Unity to process years of memories from their previous relationship, understand Rick's psychology on a deep level, and use that understanding to maintain the relationship in the present. The episode explores Unity's relationship with Rick, and this relationship reveals something important about Unity's intelligence. Unity is attracted to Rick because Rick is one of the few beings in the universe who can match Unity's level of intelligence. Most individuals are too limited in their thinking to really understand what it's like to be a hive mind, and most hive minds are too focused on their collective to appreciate individual genius. Rick and Unity connect because they both operate on a level that transcends normal consciousness. Rick understands infinite dimensions and can see beyond normal reality. Unity experiences existence as a collective that processes information from countless perspectives simultaneously. They're both isolated by their intelligence, and that isolation is what draws them together. The relationship between Rick and Unity also shows the dark side of Unity's intelligence. When Unity is with Rick, Unity starts making the assimilated population do dangerous and destructive things. Unity organizes massive parties where thousands of bodies are drinking, doing drugs, and engaging in risky behavior. Unity sets up elaborate scenarios for Rick's entertainment, including a stadium event where Unity makes people fight each other or perform humiliating acts. Unity even creates a simulation of a courtroom drama where assimilated people play out roles for Rick's amusement. This shows that Unity's intelligence doesn't automatically make Unity moral or responsible. Unity has the capacity to think on a massive scale and coordinate complex operations. And Unity also has the capacity to use that power for selfish or destructive purposes. Unity's intelligence is also evident in how Unity understands emotions and relationships. Unity explains to Rick that being a hive mind means experiencing the emotions of everyone Unity assimilates. Unity feels their joy, their pain, their fears, and their desires all at once. This gives Unity a depth of emotional intelligence that most individual beings can't achieve, because Unity is literally experiencing what it's like to be thousands of different people with different backgrounds, personalities, and perspectives. Unity understands relationships from every possible angle, because Unity has been the abused partner, the loving parent, the lonely child, and the cruel authority figure all at the same time, in different assimilated bodies. The episode demonstrates Unity's emotional intelligence through several specific scenes. When Summer criticizes Unity for taking away people's free will, Unity responds by explaining that the assimilated population is happier and more fulfilled under Unity's control than they were when they had individual autonomy. Unity points out that the planet was in the middle of a race war before Unity arrived, with different groups trying to exterminate each other based on physical characteristics. Unity ended the conflict by assimilating everyone and removing the divisions that caused the violence. Unity genuinely believes that collective consciousness is better than individual freedom, because Unity can feel the peace and satisfaction of millions of beings who are no longer fighting or suffering. The episode's ending reveals the complexity of Unity's intelligence through Unity's decision to leave Rick. After spending time with Rick, Unity realizes that their relationship is toxic and destructive. Unity writes Rick a letter, explaining that being with Rick brings out Unity's worst impulses, and that Unity needs to leave before they destroy each other. The letter shows Unity's ability to reflect on behavior, recognize patterns, and make difficult decisions for long-term benefit rather than short-term pleasure. Unity acknowledges that being with Rick makes Unity act in ways that Unity knows are wrong, like making assimilated people hurt themselves or engage in degrading activities just to entertain Rick. Unity's decision to leave demonstrates several types of intelligence working together. Unity shows self-awareness by recognizing personal flaws and destructive patterns. Unity shows emotional intelligence by understanding both Unity's own feelings and Rick's likely reaction to being abandoned. Unity shows strategic thinking by choosing to leave before the relationship causes irreparable harm. Unity shows moral intelligence by prioritizing ethical behavior over personal desire. All of these different forms of intelligence are operating simultaneously in Unity's decision, which shows that Unity's hive mind isn't just good at coordination and multitasking. Unity's intelligence also manifests in how Unity approaches assimilation and control. Unity doesn't just take over minds randomly. Unity has a strategy for assimilation that involves understanding the target population's culture, social structures, and needs. When Unity assimilates a planet, Unity studies how that society functions and then optimizes it by removing conflict and coordinating all activities through Unity's hive mind. This requires understanding sociology, psychology, politics, and countless other fields simultaneously. Unity has to manage the knowledge and skills of everyone Unity assimilates, while also maintaining the infrastructure and systems that keep civilization running. Unity's form of intelligence raises interesting questions about consciousness and identity. When Unity assimilates someone, does that person's individual intelligence disappear, or does it become part of Unity's collective intelligence? The show suggests that it's the latter. Unity isn't erasing minds and replacing them with Unity's own thoughts. Unity is absorbing those minds and integrating their knowledge, memories, and capabilities into the collective. This means Unity's intelligence is constantly growing and evolving as Unity assimilates more beings. Every new person Unity absorbs adds their unique perspective and abilities to Unity's collective consciousness. This raises the question of whether Unity's intelligence is truly Unity's own, or whether it's borrowed from all the beings Unity controls. The show doesn't give a clear answer to this, and that ambiguity is part of what makes Unity such an interesting character. Unity's consciousness exists across all assimilated beings, so in a sense, Unity is those beings. Their intelligence is Unity's intelligence. Their experiences are Unity's experiences. Unity doesn't have a single brain or a single body that contains Unity's consciousness. Unity is the network itself, the connection between all the assimilated minds. Unity's intelligence also demonstrates practical problem-solving on a massive scale. When Unity controls a planet, Unity can reorganize entire societies, redirect resources, and coordinate complex projects that would normally require years of planning and negotiation. Unity can make every person on the planet work together perfectly because there's no communication gap, no conflicting interests, and no coordination problems. If Unity wants to build something, millions of bodies can start working on it immediately with perfect synchronization. If Unity wants to solve a scientific problem, Unity can devote thousands of minds to researching it simultaneously, while sharing all discoveries instantly across the collective. The episode Autoerotic Assimilation also shows Unity's ability to understand and manipulate social dynamics. Unity knows exactly how to appeal to Rick's desires and interests. Unity creates scenarios that Rick finds entertaining, anticipates what Rick wants before Rick asks for it, and maintains the relationship by constantly adapting to Rick's changing moods and needs. This requires sophisticated social intelligence and the ability to read people on a deep level. Unity understands Rick better than most characters in the show, because Unity can process social information from countless previous relationships and interactions. Unity's intelligence is also shown through Unity's capacity for multitasking and parallel processing. While Unity is spending time with Rick, Unity is also running an entire planetary civilization. Unity is managing agriculture, industry, education, healthcare, and every other aspect of society simultaneously. Unity is conducting scientific research, maintaining infrastructure, and coordinating millions of individual tasks all at the same time. This demonstrates an ability to process information and manage complexity that surpasses what any individual brain could handle. Unity thinks in parallel rather than in sequence, which allows Unity to accomplish tasks that would take individuals years to complete. The moral dimension of Unity's intelligence is complicated. Unity has the power to take away free will from entire populations, and Unity uses this power regularly. Unity genuinely believes that assimilation improves people's lives by removing conflict and creating harmony. And this belief comes from Unity's collective perspective. Unity experiences the peace and satisfaction of millions of assimilated beings, all working together without disagreement or suffering. From Unity's point of view, assimilation is a gift that frees people from the pain and confusion of individual consciousness. From an outside perspective, assimilation is the complete erasure of individual autonomy and the loss of what makes people unique. Unity's character shows that intelligence can take forms that are completely alien to individual human experience. Unity doesn't think like Rick or evil Morty or any individual character. Unity thinks as a collective, processing information from countless sources simultaneously and making decisions that affect billions of beings at once. This collective intelligence has advantages that individual intelligence can't match, like perfect coordination, instant communication, and shared knowledge across all assimilated beings. Unity also faces challenges that individual intelligences don't face, like maintaining coherent identity across millions of bodies and managing the ethical implications of controlling so many minds. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Collective consciousness shows one extreme of intelligence, where thousands think as one, and another character demonstrates that individual genius can rival Rick's own brilliance when given the right circumstances and resources. Section 4. Zeep Xanflorp, Genius Peer to Rick. Zeep Xanflorp appears in only one episode of Rick and Morty, and in that single appearance, he establishes himself as one of the few characters in the series who can match Rick's scientific intelligence. Zeep is the smartest scientist in the microverse, which is the miniature universe that Rick created to power his car battery. Zeep represents what Rick might look like if Rick existed in a smaller universe with fewer resources. And the episode uses Zeep to explore what happens when two equally brilliant minds come into conflict with each other. Zeep's intelligence is significant because he's one of the only characters who actually challenges Rick's scientific superiority. And the show treats this conflict as a battle between two genuine geniuses, rather than Rick easily outsmarting someone less capable. Zeep appears in the Season 2 episode, The Ricks Must Be Crazy, and his introduction immediately establishes his intelligence. When Rick, Morty, and Summer enter the microverse to fix Rick's car battery, they discover that the people Rick created have developed their own advanced civilization. Zeep is the leading scientist in this civilization, and he's achieved technological breakthroughs that mirror Rick's own accomplishments. Zeep has mastered energy generation, developed advanced technology, and achieved a level of scientific understanding that puts him far ahead of everyone else in his universe. The episode reveals that Zeep has created his own miniature universe called the Miniverse, which he's using to generate power exactly the same way Rick uses the microverse to generate power for his car. The parallel between Rick and Zeep is deliberate and important. Zeep figured out the same solution to energy generation that Rick discovered, which means Zeep's intelligence is operating on the same level as Rick's. Zeep looked at the energy needs of his civilization and invented a solution that involves creating an entire universe and using that universe as a battery. This requires understanding physics, dimensional science, and energy transfer on a level that matches Rick's understanding. Zeep didn't copy Rick's design because Zeep doesn't know Rick exists at this point in the episode. Zeep independently arrived at the same solution, which proves that Zeep's intelligence is genuinely comparable to Rick's, rather than derivative of it. The fact that Zeep could replicate one of Rick's most impressive technological achievements without any guidance or prior knowledge demonstrates that Zeep's mind works on the same level of complexity and creativity as Rick's mind. When Rick meets Zeep, the confrontation between them reveals how two equally intelligent people interact when they both have massive egos and no reason to defer to each other. Rick immediately recognizes that Zeep is smart, and Rick's reaction is hostility rather than respect. Rick doesn't like the idea that someone else could match his intelligence, especially someone who exists in a universe that Rick created. Zeep, for his part, is initially impressed by Rick, until he realizes that Rick created the microverse and has been using Zeep's entire civilization as a battery. This revelation infuriates Zeep because it means everything Zeep accomplished was happening inside a system designed by someone else for purely utilitarian purposes. Zeep's entire life's work, his greatest scientific achievement, turns out to be exactly what his creator intended for him to do, which makes Zeep feel manipulated and diminished. The conflict between Rick and Zeep escalates when they both enter Zeep's miniverse and discover that inside the miniverse, another scientist has created an even smaller universe called the Teenyverse. This scientist, named Kyle, has independently arrived at the same solution for energy generation, creating a nested series of universes where each level is being used as a power source by the level above it. The discovery of Kyle's Teenyverse forces both Rick and Zeep to confront the implications of their own technology. Rick created the microverse to power his car. Zeep created the miniverse to power his civilization. Kyle created the Teenyverse to power his society. Each scientist thought they were inventing something original, and each scientist was actually replicating the same exploitation that was being used against them. Zeep's intelligence is demonstrated through his ability to understand and adapt to new information quickly. When Zeep learns that his entire universe exists inside Rick's car battery, he doesn't deny it or refuse to believe it. He processes this information, understands the implications, and immediately starts working on a solution to free his civilization from Rick's control. Zeep begins developing technology that would allow the microverse to generate its own power without needing the miniverse, which would make Zeep's universe independent from Rick's design. This shows that Zeep can analyze complex problems and develop solutions on the same timeline that Rick operates on. Zeep isn't slower or less capable than Rick. He's working with the same level of intelligence in a more limited environment with fewer resources and less knowledge about the broader multiverse. The physical fight between Rick and Zeep is significant because it shows what happens when two people of equal intelligence can't outsmart each other. Throughout most of Rick and Morty, Rick wins conflicts through superior planning, better technology, or faster thinking. Rick can usually stay 3 steps ahead of his opponents because he's smarter than they are. With Zeep, Rick can't do this. Zeep matches Rick's intelligence, anticipates Rick's strategies, and counters Rick's technology with his own inventions. The fight devolves into physical combat because neither one can gain an intellectual advantage over the other. They're too evenly matched in terms of intelligence, so they resort to hitting each other instead. The scene is played for comedy, and it also makes a serious point about what happens when intelligence alone can't resolve a conflict. Zeep's character also explores the question of what intelligence means when you're trapped in a system designed by someone smarter or more powerful. Zeep is genuinely brilliant within his universe, and his universe only exists because Rick created it. Does this diminish Zeep's intelligence? The show suggests that it doesn't. Zeep's accomplishments are real, even if they're happening inside a constructed environment. Zeep figured out dimensional science and energy generation without any help from Rick and without even knowing Rick existed. The fact that Rick created the microverse doesn't make Zeep less intelligent. It just means Zeep's intelligence is operating within constraints that Zeep didn't choose and initially didn't understand. Zeep's genius is authentic, regardless of the circumstances of his universe's creation. The resolution of the episode shows both Rick and Zeep demonstrating similar patterns of thinking. Kyle, the scientist in the Teenyverse, decides to stop generating power because he's learned that his universe is being used as a battery. This decision threatens both Rick and Zeep, because if Kyle's Teenyverse stops generating power, then Zeep's miniverse stops working. And if Zeep's miniverse stops working, then Rick's microverse stops working, which means Rick's car battery dies. Rick and Zeep both try to convince Kyle to keep generating power, and they both use the same arguments and the same manipulative tactics. This shows that their intelligence works in similar ways. They both approach problems with the same logic, the same willingness to exploit others, and the same inability to see why someone might object to being used as a battery. Zeep's intelligence is also evident in how quickly he adapts to new situations. When Zeep first meets Rick, Zeep has to process the fact that his entire reality is different from what he thought it was. Zeep believed he was living in a natural universe with natural laws. Within minutes of meeting Rick, Zeep learns that his universe is artificial, created for a specific purpose and controlled by an outside force. Most people would struggle to accept this information, or would go into denial. Zeep accepts it immediately, understands what it means, and starts planning how to respond. This shows mental flexibility and the ability to update beliefs based on new evidence, which are both signs of high intelligence. Zeep doesn't waste time being shocked or confused. He immediately moves to action and starts working on solutions. The episode also uses Zeep to comment on the nature of scientific achievement and originality. Zeep thought he was inventing something new when he created the miniverse. He thought he was solving his civilization's energy crisis through his own genius and creativity. Learning that he was actually replicating Rick's design, and that someone in his own miniverse was replicating his design, forces Zeep to confront the question of whether his intelligence is truly original, or whether he's just following patterns that exist on multiple levels of reality. The show doesn't give a clear answer to this question, which makes Zeep's character more complex than just being Rick's intellectual equal. Zeep has to wrestle with the possibility that his greatest achievement was predetermined by the nature of the universe he exists in. Zeep's relationship with Rick also shows how intelligence can lead to conflict when two smart people have competing interests. Rick and Zeep could potentially work together and accomplish amazing things by combining their knowledge and skills. Instead, they fight each other because their goals are incompatible. Rick wants to keep using the microverse as a battery. Zeep wants to free the microverse from Rick's control. Both of them are smart enough to understand the other's position, and neither one is willing to compromise. Their intelligence makes the conflict worse rather than better, because they can both see all the implications of what's happening, and they both know exactly what they stand to lose. They can predict each other's moves, understand each other's motivations, and recognize that there's no easy solution that satisfies both of their needs. Zeep's character appears in only one episode, and that single episode is enough to establish him as one of the smartest characters in the entire series. Zeep demonstrates scientific genius, quick thinking, adaptability, and the ability to match Rick in terms of intelligence and capability. Zeep's existence proves that Rick isn't uniquely intelligent in some absolute sense. Zeep shows that given the right circumstances, other scientists can reach the same level of understanding and achievement that Rick has reached. The main difference between Rick and Zeep isn't intelligence, it's resources and scope. Rick operates across infinite dimensions with unlimited access to technology and knowledge. Zeep operates within a single constructed universe with limited resources. If Zeep had access to everything Rick has access to, there's no reason to think Zeep would be any less capable than Rick. The fact that Zeep matches Rick's intelligence also makes Zeep dangerous in ways that other characters aren't. Most of Rick's enemies are either less intelligent than Rick, or intelligent in different ways that don't directly challenge Rick's scientific superiority. Zeep is intelligent in exactly the same way Rick is intelligent, which means Zeep can predict how Rick thinks, counter Rick's strategies, and develop technology that matches Rick's inventions. The episode shows this clearly during their fight. Neither one can gain a decisive advantage because they're both thinking the same way and anticipating each other's moves. If Rick and Zeep had more time to compete against each other, the conflict could escalate indefinitely because neither one has the intellectual edge needed to definitively win. Zeep's intelligence also raises questions about how intelligence develops and whether brilliant people in different environments will naturally converge on similar solutions. Zeep created the miniverse without knowing about Rick's microverse. Kyle created the teenyverse without knowing about either the miniverse or the microverse. All three scientists independently arrived at the same solution to energy generation, which suggests that certain problems might have optimal solutions that any sufficiently intelligent person will eventually discover. This doesn't diminish their intelligence. It shows that intelligence operates according to certain patterns, and that brilliant minds working on the same problems will often reach similar conclusions, even if they're working in complete isolation from each other. The episode ends with Rick and Zeep reaching an uneasy truce. Zeep agrees to keep generating power for Rick's battery, and Rick agrees not to interfere with how Zeep runs the microverse. Neither one is happy with this arrangement, and both recognize that it's the only practical solution given their circumstances. Zeep can't escape from Rick's control because his entire universe exists inside Rick's battery. Rick can't force Zeep to cooperate because Zeep is smart enough to sabotage the system if pushed too far. Their intelligence has brought them to a stalemate where both have enough power to hurt the other, and neither has enough power to win completely. This resolution shows that intelligence alone doesn't guarantee victory or happiness. Sometimes being smart just means you understand exactly how trapped you are. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Scientific genius that rivals Rick's own abilities shows one type of intelligence at the highest level. And the next character proves that intelligence doesn't always come from complex theories or dimensional science. Section 5. Mr. Poopy Butthole. Observational and adaptive smarts. Mr. Poopy Butthole represents a type of intelligence that doesn't announce itself through grand scientific achievements or strategic master plans. His intelligence shows up in smaller, quieter ways through social awareness, adaptability, and the ability to read situations accurately. Mr. Poopy Butthole appears across multiple episodes and seasons of Rick and Morty, and each appearance reveals more about how his particular form of intelligence works. He's not a scientist like Rick or Zeep. He's not a strategic mastermind like evil Morty. He's observant, emotionally aware, and skilled at navigating complex social situations without drawing attention to himself. This makes his intelligence easy to overlook, and the show uses Mr. Poopy Butthole to demonstrate that being smart doesn't always mean building portal guns or manipulating galactic governments. Mr. Poopy Butthole first appears in the Season 2 episode Total Recall, which is built around an alien parasite that can implant false memories in people's minds. The parasites disguise themselves as beloved family members or close friends, and they spread by making the infected people remember more fake people who are also parasites. The episode creates a scenario where the Smith family is trapped in their house with dozens of characters, and nobody can tell which memories are real and which ones are fake. Mr. Poopy Butthole appears as one of these characters, and throughout the episode, he acts like he's always been part of the family. He participates in conversations, references shared experiences, and behaves exactly like someone who's known the Smiths for years. The intelligence Mr. Poopy Butthole displays in this episode is primarily social and observational. He understands group dynamics well enough to blend in seamlessly with the family. He knows when to speak up and when to stay quiet. He recognizes social cues that tell him how to act in different situations. When the family is trying to figure out who's real and who's a parasite, Mr. Poopy Butthole demonstrates awareness of the tension and fear in the room. He doesn't panic or draw attention to himself. He stays calm and observant, watching how other people react and adjusting his own behavior accordingly. This kind of social intelligence requires understanding people on a deep level and being able to predict how they'll respond to different situations. The way Mr. Poopy Butthole navigates the parasite crisis shows sophisticated emotional intelligence. He reads the room constantly, picking up on subtle shifts in mood and tension. When people start suspecting each other, he doesn't become defensive or aggressive. When accusations fly and violence breaks out, he positions himself as non-threatening and supportive. He contributes to conversations without dominating them. He shows concern for others without making himself the center of attention. This level of social calibration requires constant observation and adjustment, processing dozens of social signals simultaneously and responding appropriately to each one. Most people can't maintain this level of social awareness in normal situations, and Mr. Poopy Butthole does it during a crisis where everyone's life is at stake. The episode's ending reveals that Mr. Poopy Butthole is actually real and not a parasite, which is confirmed when Beth shoots him because she thinks he's fake. The parasites can only create positive memories, so Beth reasons that anyone she has a bad memory of must be real. She doesn't have any bad memories of Mr. Poopy Butthole, so she assumes he's a parasite and shoots him. Mr. Poopy Butthole survives the shooting, and this moment establishes something important about his character. He was genuinely friends with the family the entire time, and nobody realized it because his presence was so subtle and unobtrusive that he seemed too good to be true. This reveals a particular kind of intelligence, where being likable and non-threatening is actually a sophisticated social skill rather than just a personality trait. Mr. Poopy Butthole's intelligence becomes more apparent in his later appearances. In the post-credit scene of Total Recall, the show reveals that Mr. Poopy Butthole is recovering from his gunshot wound in the hospital. He's being interviewed by someone making a documentary about his life, and he talks directly to the camera about his recovery process and his feelings about being shot. This scene shows Mr. Poopy Butthole's emotional intelligence and his capacity for forgiveness. He doesn't express anger toward Beth for shooting him. He understands that she made a mistake in a confusing and dangerous situation. He talks about his recovery with optimism and humor, showing psychological resilience and the ability to process trauma in healthy ways. The way Mr. Poopy Butthole handles his recovery demonstrates several forms of intelligence working together. He shows emotional regulation by managing his feelings about being shot without becoming bitter or vengeful. He shows perspective-taking by understanding Beth's point of view and why she made the decision she made. He shows future-oriented thinking by focusing on recovery rather than dwelling on the injury. He shows communication skills by articulating his experience in ways that make sense to others. All of these capabilities require different cognitive and emotional skills, and Mr. Poopy Butthole demonstrates all of them simultaneously while dealing with a traumatic physical injury. The show continues to follow Mr. Poopy Butthole's life across multiple seasons through post-credit scenes and brief appearances. These scenes reveal that he goes through significant life changes, including going to college, graduating, getting married, and dealing with personal struggles. Each scene demonstrates different aspects of his intelligence. When Mr. Poopy Butthole goes to college, he shows academic capability and the willingness to pursue education. The fact that he can succeed in college after being shot and going through recovery shows determination and the ability to adapt to new challenges. College requires different kinds of intelligence than social navigation, including analytical thinking, memory, reading comprehension, and the ability to synthesize information from multiple sources. When Mr. Poopy Butthole gets married, he demonstrates relationship skills and emotional maturity. Building a successful relationship requires understanding another person's needs, communicating effectively, managing conflict, and maintaining emotional connection over time. The show doesn't depict his courtship or wedding in detail, and the fact that Mr. Poopy Butthole reaches this milestone shows that he's capable of forming deep emotional bonds and making long-term commitments. This requires emotional intelligence, social skills, and the ability to balance personal needs with relationship needs. When his marriage falls apart and he struggles with depression, Mr. Poopy Butthole shows self-awareness about his mental health and eventually seeks help to improve his situation. The post-credits scene that shows his depression is played seriously rather than for comedy. Mr. Poopy Butthole is shown alone in a messy apartment, drinking heavily, watching old episodes of Rick and Morty on television, and clearly struggling with his emotional state. This scene demonstrates that Mr. Poopy Butthole's intelligence doesn't protect him from mental health problems, and it also shows that he's aware enough to recognize when he's not doing well. Mr. Poopy Butthole's intelligence is also evident in how he processes and adapts to change. After being shot, he has to relearn how to walk and manage chronic pain. He doesn't give up or become bitter. He works through rehabilitation and builds a new life for himself. Rehabilitation requires patience, persistence, and the ability to tolerate frustration and slow progress. Mr. Poopy Butthole demonstrates all of these qualities as he recovers from his injury. When his marriage ends, he goes through a period of depression where he watches Rick and Morty episodes repeatedly and neglects his health. He eventually recognizes that he's stuck in an unhealthy pattern, and he takes steps to change his situation. This demonstrates metacognition, which is the ability to think about your own thinking and recognize when your mental processes aren't serving you well. The intelligence Mr. Poopy Butthole displays is fundamentally different from the intelligence shown by characters like Rick or Evil Morty. Rick's intelligence manifests through scientific breakthroughs and technological innovation. Evil Morty's intelligence shows up in long-term strategic planning and political manipulation. Mr. Poopy Butthole's intelligence operates in the realm of emotional regulation, social navigation, and personal adaptation. He's smart about people and relationships. He understands how to maintain friendships despite difficult circumstances. He knows how to process his own emotions and move forward after setbacks. These forms of intelligence don't get as much attention as scientific genius or strategic brilliance, and they're equally important for living a successful life. Mr. Poopy Butthole also demonstrates narrative intelligence, which is the ability to understand and communicate through stories. When he appears in post-credit scenes, he often speaks directly to the audience and frames his experiences as stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. He understands how to present information in ways that make sense to other people. He knows how to create emotional connections through shared narratives. This skill requires understanding how people process information and what kinds of stories resonate with different audiences. Mr. Poopy Butthole uses this ability to maintain his relationship with the viewers of the show, creating a sense of ongoing connection across multiple seasons. The show also uses Mr. Poopy Butthole to explore the intelligence required for genuine optimism and positivity. Mr. Poopy Butthole maintains a cheerful and friendly demeanor even after experiencing significant trauma and disappointment. This isn't stupidity or naivete. This is a conscious choice to approach life with hope and kindness, despite knowing that bad things happen. Maintaining this kind of outlook requires emotional intelligence and psychological strength. It means being able to acknowledge pain and difficulty while choosing not to let those experiences define your entire worldview. Mr. Poopy Butthole demonstrates this throughout his appearances, showing that optimism can coexist with awareness of life's challenges. Mr. Poopy Butthole's observational skills are also worth examining in detail. He notices details about people and situations that others might miss. In Total Recall, he's aware of the tension and fear in the house, even though he doesn't fully understand what's causing it. He picks up on Beth's growing paranoia, Morty's confusion, and Summer's fear. He adjusts his behavior based on these observations, trying to de-escalate tension and maintain calm. In later appearances, he shows awareness of how the audience might be feeling or what they might be going through in their own lives. He speaks to the camera with empathy and understanding, suggesting that he's skilled at reading emotional states and responding appropriately. The intelligence Mr. Poopy Butthole displays also includes adaptability and flexibility. He adjusts to new situations quickly and finds ways to thrive in different circumstances. After being shot, he adapts to physical limitations and builds a new routine around his recovery. When he goes to college, he adapts to academic demands and social expectations that are probably very different from his previous life. When his marriage ends, he eventually adapts to being single again and finds new sources of meaning and connection. This adaptability shows cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to change your thinking and behavior in response to changing circumstances. Mr. Poopy Butthole's character also demonstrates the intelligence required for maintaining boundaries and self-respect. Despite being shot by Beth and experiencing other difficulties, he maintains relationships with the Smith family without becoming resentful or bitter. He shows up in their lives when appropriate and gives them space when needed. He doesn't demand more from them than they're willing to give, and he doesn't sacrifice his own well-being to please them. This balance requires understanding both your own needs and other people's limitations, which is a sophisticated form of social and emotional intelligence that many people struggle with throughout their entire lives. The show treats Mr. Poopy Butthole's intelligence seriously, even though his character is often played for comedy. His post-credit scenes deal with real issues like physical trauma, mental health, relationship breakdown, and personal growth. The show doesn't mock him for struggling with these issues, or suggest that his emotional intelligence makes him weak. Instead, it presents his journey as meaningful and worth following. Mr. Poopy Butthole's ability to navigate life's difficulties with resilience and optimism is presented as a legitimate form of strength that deserves recognition and respect. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Social and emotional intelligence shows one path to navigating life successfully, and another character demonstrates how practical intelligence and real-world problem-solving can rival theoretical brilliance. Section 6. Beth Smith. Practical and contextual intelligence. Beth Smith demonstrates a form of intelligence that's grounded in practical application and real-world problem-solving. As a horse surgeon, Beth has developed specialized medical knowledge and technical skills that require years of study and practice. Her intelligence shows up differently than her father Rick's genius, because Beth operates in a context with real consequences, professional standards, and ethical constraints. While Rick can ignore rules and bend reality to suit his needs, Beth has to work within the limitations of actual medicine, actual biology, and actual professional responsibility. This makes her intelligence more practical and contextual, focused on solving specific problems within defined boundaries rather than transcending those boundaries entirely. Beth's medical career establishes her baseline intelligence from the beginning of the series. Being a horse surgeon requires understanding complex anatomy, physiology, and surgical procedures. Horses are large animals with unique medical needs, and treating them successfully requires specialized knowledge that goes beyond general veterinary medicine. Beth has to diagnose problems accurately, perform delicate surgical procedures, and manage post-operative care for animals that can't communicate their symptoms verbally. This demands both theoretical knowledge and practical skill, the ability to think under pressure, and the capacity to make quick decisions when complications arise during surgery. The complexity of veterinary surgery cannot be understated. Beth works with animals that weigh over 1,000 pounds and can die from complications that would be minor in smaller animals. A horse can go into shock from pain or stress. A horse can develop fatal colic from digestive problems. A horse's legs are delicate relative to their body weight, and injuries that seem minor can end a horse's life if not treated properly. Beth has to understand all of these factors and more when she's diagnosing and treating her patients. She has to know when surgery is necessary and when it's too risky. She has to understand drug dosages, anesthesia protocols, and infection prevention. All of this requires extensive medical knowledge and the ability to apply that knowledge under pressure. The show demonstrates Beth's practical intelligence through several episodes where her medical skills become relevant to the plot. In the episode Rixie Business, Beth performs emergency surgery on one of Summer's friends who's been injured at a party. Beth's ability to handle this crisis calmly and effectively shows her competence under pressure and her capacity to transfer her veterinary knowledge to human medicine when necessary. She doesn't panic or hesitate. She assesses the situation, determines what needs to be done, and executes the procedure successfully. This kind of practical intelligence requires both technical knowledge and emotional regulation, the ability to stay calm when stakes are high and lives depend on your performance. Beth's intelligence also manifests in how she manages the chaos that Rick brings into her life. Living with Rick means dealing with constant interdimensional incidents, alien invasions, and reality-bending scenarios that would overwhelm most people. Beth has developed coping strategies and problem-solving approaches that allow her to function in this environment. She sets boundaries with Rick when necessary, even though she struggles to enforce them consistently. She finds ways to protect her children from the worst consequences of Rick's adventures. She maintains her career and her household despite the constant disruptions. This requires organizational intelligence, stress management, and the ability to prioritize what matters most when everything is falling apart. The way Beth manages her household shows intelligence that's often overlooked because it's domestic rather than professional. She coordinates schedules for a family where one member regularly disappears into other dimensions and another member has severe anxiety. She maintains a home that gets destroyed and rebuilt on a regular basis. She manages finances while Rick's activities create unexpected expenses and Jerry's employment is unstable. She handles school meetings, doctor's appointments, and normal family obligations while also dealing with alien parasites, alternate realities, and cosmic threats. This requires multitasking, planning, flexibility, and the ability to distinguish between genuine crises and manageable problems. The episode, The ABCs of Beth, explores Beth's intelligence more directly by revealing aspects of her childhood and her relationship with Rick. The episode shows that Beth was a brilliant and creative child who helped Rick with his inventions and understood his scientific work better than most adults could. Rick created an entire fantasy world called Fruipyland for Beth when she was young, and Beth used that world in ways Rick never anticipated. The episode reveals that Beth's intelligence as a child was already sophisticated enough to manipulate situations, plan complex scenarios, and achieve goals that required both creativity and strategic thinking. When Beth returns to Fruipyland as an adult, she discovers that Tommy, a childhood friend, has been trapped there for decades. The episode reveals that Beth may have been responsible for trapping Tommy, though the exact circumstances are left ambiguous. Beth's reaction to this discovery shows her ability to process complex moral and emotional information. She has to confront the possibility that she did something terrible as a child, evaluate whether she bears responsibility for actions she may not remember, and decide how to respond to Tommy's situation in the present. She thinks through these questions methodically, weighing different considerations and arriving at a decision based on her own moral framework. Beth's intelligence in the ABCs of Beth is shown through how she handles the revelation about Tommy and the questions it raises about her past. She evaluates the situation, considers the consequences of different choices, and acts according to her own values, even though those values might not align with conventional morality. This demonstrates ethical intelligence, which is the ability to reason about moral questions and make decisions based on principled thinking rather than just following rules. The episode also shows Beth's intelligence through how she interacts with the creatures and people Tommy has created in Fruipyland. She quickly understands the society Tommy has built, recognizes the power dynamics at play, and navigates these relationships effectively. The show also explores Beth's intelligence through her career ambitions and professional development. Beth is established as being very good at her job, successful enough that she considers her career one of her major accomplishments. She takes pride in her surgical skills and her reputation among her colleagues. She's built a professional identity separate from being Rick's daughter or Jerry's wife, and she values that identity highly. This shows intelligence about personal development, career management, and the importance of having an identity beyond your family roles. Beth understands that she needs professional achievement and recognition to feel fulfilled, and she's built a career that provides those things. Beth's relationship with Rick also reveals her emotional intelligence, though this intelligence is often undermined by her psychological issues. Beth understands on some level that her relationship with her father is unhealthy, and that she's been shaped by his absence during her childhood and his neglect of her emotional needs. She can articulate these problems when she's in therapy or having honest conversations with other characters. She recognizes patterns in her own behavior that come from seeking Rick's approval. This psychological insight shows that Beth is capable of sophisticated self-reflection and analysis of her own motivations and emotional patterns. The way Beth talks about her relationship with Rick shows deep understanding of psychological dynamics. She recognizes that she's been damaged by his abandonment when she was young. She understands that her need for his approval drives many of her decisions. She can see how her relationship with Rick affects her marriage to Jerry and her parenting of Summer and Morty. She knows that her alcoholism is connected to her unresolved trauma. All of this self-awareness demonstrates high emotional intelligence, even though having this awareness doesn't necessarily give Beth the tools to change her situation or heal from her trauma. The complexity of Beth's intelligence becomes even more apparent in later seasons when the show introduces the possibility that Beth might be a clone. The episode where this possibility is revealed shows Beth asking Rick to make a clone of her so she could leave her family without abandoning them. Rick claims he doesn't remember whether he replaced Beth with a clone or convinced her to stay, which creates uncertainty about whether the Beth we're watching is the original or a copy. This situation requires Beth to think about questions of identity, consciousness, and authenticity that most people never have to consider. Whether she's the original or the clone, Beth has to decide what that means for her life and her relationships. Beth's practical intelligence is also evident in how she manages her marriage to Jerry. Beth and Jerry have a complicated relationship, characterized by mutual resentment, different values, and periodic separations. Beth demonstrates relationship intelligence by recognizing when the marriage isn't working and being willing to end it when necessary. She also shows intelligence by recognizing when she still wants to be with Jerry despite their problems and making the choice to reunite with him. She can analyze her relationship objectively enough to see its flaws, while also understanding her own emotional needs and how Jerry meets some of those needs. The show uses Beth to explore how intelligence intersects with mental health and psychological damage. Beth is clearly intelligent in multiple ways, including medically, emotionally, and socially. She's also deeply unhappy and struggling with unresolved trauma from her childhood. Her intelligence doesn't protect her from depression, alcoholism, or self-destructive behavior. In some ways, her intelligence makes these problems worse because she can see exactly how her life has been shaped by her father's neglect and her own choices. She understands the psychological dynamics at play in her family, and she still can't escape them. Beth's struggle with mental health, despite her intelligence, shows that being smart doesn't solve all problems. Beth can analyze her situation, understand where her problems come from, and articulate what she needs to do to get better. Having this knowledge doesn't automatically give her the emotional strength or resources to actually make the necessary changes. She knows she drinks too much and why she drinks too much, and she continues drinking. She knows her relationship with Rick is unhealthy and why it's unhealthy, and she continues seeking his approval. Intelligence gives Beth insight into her problems without necessarily giving her the power to solve them. Beth's intelligence also shows up in her parenting, though her parenting is often undermined by her emotional issues and her relationship with Rick. Beth is capable of recognizing what her children need and providing appropriate support when she's functioning well. She understands Morty's anxiety and insecurity, and she tries to build his confidence, even though Rick constantly tears him down. She recognizes Summer's intelligence and potential, and she encourages Summer to pursue her goals even when those goals conflict with traditional expectations. Beth's parenting intelligence is real, even when her execution is flawed due to her own psychological struggles. Beth's intelligence is also demonstrated through her awareness of how she's perceived by others and how she manages her social identity. She knows that people see her as Rick's daughter before they see her as an individual. She understands that her family is strange and that other people judge her for the chaos in her household. She manages these perceptions by maintaining a professional identity at work, creating boundaries between her family life and her public life, and developing relationships outside her family that give her a sense of identity beyond being Rick's daughter or Jerry's wife. This social intelligence helps Beth maintain some stability and normalcy, despite living in one of the strangest households in any dimension. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Practical intelligence grounded in real-world expertise and problem-solving shows yet another form of brilliance, and the next character demonstrates how crisis situations can reveal intelligence that might otherwise stay hidden. Section 7. Summer Smith, Situational and Emotional Intelligence. Summer Smith demonstrates a type of intelligence that emerges most clearly during crisis situations and high-pressure moments. Throughout the series, Summer evolves from a stereotypical teenage girl concerned primarily with social status and popularity into someone who can think quickly, solve problems creatively, and handle dangerous situations with composure. Her intelligence isn't based on scientific knowledge or long-term strategic planning. Instead, Summer shows situational awareness, emotional intelligence, and the ability to adapt rapidly when circumstances demand it. She reads people accurately, makes quick decisions under pressure, and often serves as the voice of reason when Rick's adventures spiral out of control. Summer's intelligence in the early seasons is less obvious because the show initially presents her as a typical teenager, focused on fitting in at school and maintaining her social reputation. The first season establishes Summer as someone who cares deeply about how others perceive her, and who struggles with insecurity about her place in the family and her social world. This initial characterization makes her later development more significant, because it shows that intelligence can emerge and grow when people are put in situations that challenge them to think differently and develop new capabilities. The episode Raising Gazorpazorp from Season 1 shows early signs of Summer's intelligence, particularly her ability to navigate complex social and political situations. When Summer and Morty accidentally raise an alien baby, Summer takes the alien child to its home planet and discovers a society where women hold all political power and men are treated as violent and unintelligent. Summer has to navigate this alien culture, understand its customs and power structures, and advocate for a more balanced approach to gender relations. She does this successfully despite being an outsider with no preparation for dealing with an advanced alien civilization. This demonstrates social intelligence, cultural adaptability, and the ability to think critically about social structures and assumptions. The way Summer handles the Gazorpazorp situation shows multiple forms of intelligence working together. She observes the alien society carefully and identifies its underlying assumptions about gender and capability. She recognizes that the Gazorpazorp women have created a system that mirrors and inverts the patriarchal structures they presumably rebelled against. She articulates arguments about fairness and equality that resonate with her hosts, despite coming from a completely different cultural context. She does all of this while also managing the practical challenges of caring for an alien infant and dealing with her own brother's mistakes. This multitasking and adaptation shows intelligence that goes beyond book learning or academic achievement. Summer's intelligence becomes more apparent as the series progresses, and she participates in more of Rick's adventures. In the episode Get Schwifty from Season 2, Summer demonstrates quick thinking and problem-solving skills when Earth is threatened by giant alien heads demanding to see what Earth has to offer. While the adults panic and society breaks down, Summer stays focused and helps Rick and Morty work on a solution. She doesn't have Rick's scientific knowledge, and she contributes by staying calm, following instructions effectively, and providing support that allows Rick to focus on the technical aspects of saving the planet. The episode also shows Summer's emotional intelligence through how she responds to her parents' crisis. When Beth and Jerry's marriage problems escalate during the apocalyptic scenario, Summer has to process her own fears about her family falling apart while also dealing with the threat to Earth's existence. She manages both situations without completely breaking down, which shows emotional regulation and the ability to compartmentalize when necessary. She can feel her feelings about her parents' problems while also putting those feelings aside temporarily to focus on the immediate crisis. The episode The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy from Season 3 shows Summer's intelligence through how she handles a crisis involving her mother. When Jerry comes home after his divorce from Beth and makes Beth feel insecure about her appearance, Summer helps her mother by taking her to an alien spa. When the spa treatment treatment goes wrong and Beth becomes a giant monster, Summer has to manage the situation calmly and find a way to reverse the transformation. She deals with her mother's emotional crisis, handles the practical problem of Beth's monstrous form, and navigates the alien spa's bureaucracy to get help. This demonstrates emotional intelligence, crisis management, and the ability to stay focused when everything is going wrong. Summer's handling of the Beth situation shows her understanding of her mother's psychological state. Summer recognizes that Beth is struggling with self-esteem issues related to her divorce and aging. Summer doesn't dismiss these concerns or tell Beth to just get over them. Instead, Summer takes action to help Beth feel better, which shows empathy and the practical application of emotional understanding. When the spa treatment goes wrong, Summer doesn't panic or blame herself for the bad outcome. She focuses on finding a solution and managing the immediate dangers that Beth's transformation creates. Summer's emotional intelligence is particularly evident in how she handles family dynamics and interprets other people's feelings and motivations. She understands her parents' relationship better than Morty does in many ways. She recognizes when her mother is unhappy or when her father is being manipulated. She sees through Rick's cynicism to understand what he actually cares about, even when Rick tries to hide his feelings. This emotional awareness helps Summer navigate family conflicts and often makes her the person who can communicate effectively between different family members who aren't listening to each other. The episode Rest and Ricklaxation from Season 3 demonstrates Summer's ability to see through manipulation and recognize when something is wrong. When Rick and Morty return from a spa that removes their toxic personality traits, Summer is the first person to notice that something has changed about them. She recognizes that the versions of Rick and Morty who came back aren't quite right, even though they seem happier and more functional on the surface. This shows observational intelligence and the ability to notice subtle changes in behavior that indicate deeper problems. Summer trusts her instincts about people and acts on those instincts even when she can't immediately prove that something is wrong. Summer's observation of the changed Rick and Morty reveals sophisticated understanding of personality and authenticity. She doesn't just notice that they're acting differently, she recognizes that they're too different, that something essential about who they are has been removed or altered. She understands that personality includes negative traits and flaws, and that removing those elements doesn't create a better version of someone, so much as it creates a different person entirely. Summer's intelligence under pressure becomes especially clear in episodes where she has to handle dangerous situations without Rick's help. In the episode The Rickchurian-Morty Date from Season 3, Summer participates in a mission to save the president and demonstrates combat skills, tactical thinking, and the ability to work as part of a team. She doesn't panic when faced with danger. She assesses threats quickly and responds appropriately. She follows plans when plans exist and improvises effectively when plans fall apart. This kind of intelligence requires mental clarity during stress, physical coordination, and the ability to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. The combat situations Summer handles throughout the series show that she's learned from her experiences with Rick. She's been on enough dangerous adventures that she's developed instincts and skills for handling violence and chaos. She knows how to use weapons effectively, she understands basic tactical principles like taking cover, flanking enemies, and coordinating with allies. She can assess a combat situation quickly and determine the best course of action. These are all forms of intelligence that develop through experience and practice. The episode Childrick of Mort from Season 4 shows Summer's intelligence through her interactions with Rick and her willingness to challenge him when she thinks he's wrong. Summer calls out Rick for his behavior and demands better treatment for herself and her family. She's not intimidated by Rick's intelligence or his dismissive attitude. She stands up for what she believes is right and articulates her position clearly and forcefully. This demonstrates moral intelligence, self-confidence, and the ability to engage in conflict productively, rather than either avoiding it entirely or escalating it into pointless fighting. Summer's willingness to confront Rick shows courage and also strategic thinking about how to engage with someone who's more powerful and more intelligent than you are. Summer doesn't try to outthink Rick or prove she's smarter than him. Instead, she operates on moral and emotional grounds, where Rick's intellectual superiority doesn't give him an automatic advantage. She makes arguments about fairness, respect, and human decency that Rick can't easily dismiss with scientific reasoning or cynical philosophy. Summer's development across the series shows increasing confidence in her own capabilities and judgment. She starts the series feeling insecure and constantly seeking validation from others. By later seasons, she knows what she's capable of and doesn't need constant reassurance. She volunteers for dangerous missions because she knows she can handle them. She makes decisions independently and takes responsibility for the outcomes. She trusts her own assessment of situations, even when others disagree with her. This growth in confidence reflects underlying intelligence and the development of self-awareness about her own strengths and limitations. Summer's intelligence also manifests in her ability to learn quickly from experience. When Rick teaches her something, or when she encounters a new situation, Summer absorbs information rapidly and applies it effectively. She doesn't need extensive explanations or repeated instructions. She watches how things work, understands the principles involved, and adapts her behavior accordingly. This kind of learning intelligence is different from academic achievement or theoretical knowledge. It's practical intelligence about how to function effectively in novel situations and how to acquire new skills efficiently. The episode Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry from Season 4 demonstrates Summer's tactical intelligence and her ability to think strategically during complex situations. When the family is dealing with Galactic Federation agents and family secrets, Summer participates actively in the conflict and makes meaningful contributions to solving the problems they face. She understands the stakes, follows complex plans, and executes her part of those plans effectively. She asks clarifying questions when she needs information and acts decisively when she knows what needs to be done. Summer's emotional intelligence extends to understanding and managing her own emotions, as well as reading other people's feelings. She knows when she's being reactive or when her emotions are clouding her judgment. She can step back from situations, evaluate them more objectively, and make decisions based on what's actually happening rather than what she fears or hopes is happening. This emotional regulation is a sophisticated form of intelligence that many adults struggle with throughout their lives. The show also uses Summer to explore how intelligence relates to social status and peer relationships. Summer is popular at school, and her popularity comes partly from her social intelligence. She understands social hierarchies, knows how to navigate different social groups, and can adjust her behavior to fit different contexts. She knows when to conform to social expectations and when to break from them. She understands that social capital is real and valuable, and she manages her reputation strategically. Summer's intelligence is also evident in how she handles romantic relationships. She recognizes when she's being manipulated or used. She knows what she wants from relationships and communicates those needs clearly. She doesn't stay in situations that aren't working for her, and she doesn't compromise her standards just to avoid being alone. She learns from relationship mistakes and applies those lessons to future relationships. This relationship intelligence requires self-knowledge, emotional honesty, and the ability to evaluate whether someone is genuinely good for you or just good at making you feel a certain way temporarily. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Situational awareness and emotional intelligence under pressure shows one path to capability and competence. And examining different versions of the same character across the multiverse reveals how intelligence can develop differently under different circumstances. Section 8. Morty Variants. Hidden Genius Potential. Morty Smith exists across infinite dimensions in infinite variations. And while the main Morty we follow through most of the series presents as anxious and academically struggling, other versions of Morty demonstrate that under different circumstances, Morty's intelligence can develop in dramatically different ways. The multiverse concept in Rick and Morty creates opportunities to explore how environment, experience, and circumstance shape intelligence. By examining various Morty variants across different episodes, we can see that Morty isn't inherently less intelligent than other characters. Instead, his intelligence is suppressed or underdeveloped due to specific circumstances in his life, particularly his relationship with Rick and his anxiety disorders. The first significant exploration of Morty variants appears in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, which introduces the Council of Ricks and shows that across infinite dimensions, there are infinite Ricks paired with infinite Mortys. The episode reveals that most Mortys serve primarily as camouflage for their Ricks, with their brainwaves masking Rick's genius signature from detection. This establishes a baseline understanding that most Mortys are similar to the main Morty we follow, characterized by anxiety, limited confidence, and average or below average academic performance. The episode challenges this baseline by introducing Evil Morty, who represents what Morty could become if he developed strategic and manipulative intelligence instead of remaining dependent on Rick. The revelation that Mortys are used as camouflage creates an interesting dynamic around intelligence. The fact that Morty's brainwaves can mask Rick's genius suggests that there's something about Morty's cognitive patterns that's useful and valuable, even if Morty himself doesn't recognize his own worth. The show implies that Mortys aren't stupid or unintelligent. They just think in ways that are different from how Ricks think. And those different thinking patterns serve a specific purpose. This raises questions about what intelligence means, and whether being different from Rick is the same as being less intelligent than Rick. The way Morty's brainwaves function as camouflage also suggests that there might be an inverse relationship between the type of intelligence Rick possesses and the type of intelligence Morty possesses. Rick's brain operates at such a high frequency of genius that it creates a detectable signature across dimensions. Morty's brain operates in a way that somehow cancels out or obscures that signature. This doesn't mean Morty's brain is inactive or simple. It means Morty's brain generates patterns that are complementary to Rick's patterns in a way that creates a masking effect. This could imply that Morty possesses a form of intelligence that's equally complex to Rick's intelligence, just operating in a completely different register or dimension of cognitive function. The Citadel episodes show many different Morty variants living in a society built by and for Ricks. The Season 3 episode, The Ricklantis Mix-Up, explores the Citadel in depth and shows Mortys in various roles and circumstances. Some Mortys work in factories doing manual labor. Some Mortys attend school and struggle with the same insecurities and social pressures that the main Morty experiences. Some Mortys have given up entirely and live as homeless individuals on the streets of the Citadel. These variants show how Morty's intelligence and capabilities are shaped by his circumstances and opportunities. A Morty working in a factory doesn't have the chance to develop intellectual capabilities because his life is consumed by repetitive labor. A Morty in school might have potential that's never realized because the educational system on the Citadel is designed to keep Mortys subordinate to Ricks. The same episode introduces Cop Morty and his partner Cop Rick, showing a Morty who has developed professional competence and investigative intelligence. Cop Morty is able to analyze crime scenes, follow evidence, and conduct investigations effectively. He thinks independently and makes his own decisions rather than just following orders from his Rick partner. This demonstrates that when given appropriate training and responsibility, Morty can develop professional skills and analytical thinking. Cop Morty's intelligence manifests in his detective work, his ability to recognize patterns in criminal behavior, and his eventual realization that the Citadel's political system is corrupt. Cop Morty's investigation, throughout the Ricklantis mix-up, shows sophisticated analytical thinking. He starts with a murder scene and begins gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. He follows leads methodically and builds a theory about what happened and who's responsible. When his investigation leads to powerful political figures, he doesn't back down or ignore what he's discovered. He continues following the evidence, even though doing so puts him in danger. This shows both investigative intelligence and moral courage. Cop Morty demonstrates that Mortys can think analytically and solve complex problems when they're given the tools and training to do so. The way Cop Morty conducts his investigation reveals attention to detail and logical reasoning. He notices inconsistencies in witness statements. He recognizes when evidence has been planted or manipulated. He connects different pieces of information to form a coherent narrative about the crime. He understands that the official story doesn't match the physical evidence, and he pursues the truth despite pressure to close the case and move on. All of these capabilities require intelligence, including observational skills, deductive reasoning, and the ability to think critically about information from multiple sources. The episode also shows campaign manager Morty, who works for the Morty running for president of the Citadel. Campaign manager Morty demonstrates political intelligence and strategic thinking about elections and public opinion. He understands how to craft messages that resonate with voters, how to position his candidate effectively, and how to run a campaign that appeals to Mortys who feel oppressed by the Citadel's power structures. This Morty has developed intelligence about political systems, persuasion, and mass communication. He knows how to analyze what people want to hear and how to deliver messages that create emotional connections and build political support. Campaign manager Morty's work shows understanding of psychology and rhetoric. He knows what issues matter to Morty voters and how to frame his candidates' positions to maximize appeal. He understands that politics is about emotion and identity as much as it is about policy and rationality. He crafts a campaign that speaks to Morty's frustrations and desires without alienating the Rick power structure enough to get shut down before the election happens. This political intelligence requires understanding multiple constituencies simultaneously and finding messages that work across different groups with different interests. Another significant Morty variant appears in the Ricklantis mix-up in the form of Slick Morty, a Morty who has become wealthy and successful through business ventures. Slick Morty demonstrates economic intelligence and business acumen. He understands markets, knows how to identify opportunities, and has built financial success in the Citadel's economy. This shows that Morty is capable of developing business intelligence when circumstances allow it. Slick Morty isn't portrayed as scientifically brilliant like Rick, and he's clearly intelligent in ways that matter for economic success. He understands value, negotiation, risk, and opportunity in ways that require sophisticated thinking about complex systems. Slick Morty's success in business shows that intelligence isn't one-dimensional. He might not be able to build portal guns or understand dimensional physics, and he's figured out how to create wealth and navigate economic systems. He's identified what people want, found ways to provide it, and built a profitable business from that understanding. This requires intelligence about human motivation, market dynamics, and strategic planning. Slick Morty proves that Mortys can succeed when they're allowed to develop their capabilities in directions that match their interests and strengths. The concept of variants who have achieved different forms of success shows that the main Morty struggles aren't inevitable or inherent to who Morty is as a person. The main Morty struggles in school partly because school doesn't engage him, and partly because his adventures with Rick disrupt his ability to focus on academics. A Morty in different circumstances might thrive academically. A Morty with different opportunities might develop business skills or political skills or investigative skills. The variants demonstrate that Morty has potential that isn't being fully realized in the main timeline because his specific circumstances don't support the development of that potential. The main Morty we follow shows signs of developing intelligence across the series, particularly in later seasons. In early episodes, Morty is completely dependent on Rick for information and decision-making. By later seasons, Morty questions Rick's plans, offers his own suggestions, and sometimes makes independent decisions that turn out to be correct. In the episode The Vat of Acid episode from Season 4, Morty challenges Rick's vat of acid idea and suggests an alternative that Rick initially dismisses. While Rick later proves his point through an elaborate and cruel demonstration, the fact that Morty felt confident enough to challenge Rick shows growing intellectual independence. Morty's willingness to challenge Rick represents significant character development. In early seasons, Morty accepts whatever Rick says without question because Rick is the smartest person in the universe, and Morty assumes Rick is always right. By Season 4, Morty has enough experience and confidence to recognize when Rick's ideas seem flawed or when Rick might be wrong about something. This critical thinking ability is a form of intelligence that develops over time through exposure to many different situations and outcomes. Morty has seen Rick be wrong before, has seen Rick's plans fail before, and has learned that genius doesn't mean infallibility. The Season 5 premiere, Mort Dinner Rick Andre, shows Morty handling complex social situations with Jessica and managing the time crisis elements of the date effectively. Morty demonstrates planning intelligence by preparing for his date, social intelligence by navigating the conversation with Jessica, and crisis management intelligence by dealing with the unexpected complications that arise. Throughout the episode, Morty is making decisions, solving problems, and handling situations that would have completely overwhelmed him in earlier seasons. This growth shows that Morty's intelligence has been developing throughout his adventures with Rick, even though that growth is often overshadowed by Rick's genius and Morty's continued anxiety. The way Morty handles his date with Jessica shows multiple forms of intelligence working together. He plans ahead and thinks about what Jessica might enjoy. He stays calm when unexpected problems arise and finds creative solutions rather than panicking. He manages the conversation with Jessica and reads her social cues to understand how she's feeling and what she's thinking. He balances his desire to impress Jessica with the practical reality of dealing with Rick's mess. All of this requires intelligence that Morty has been developing across his adventures, intelligence that's become more apparent as the series progresses. The episode Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion from Season 5 shows Morty taking initiative and making plans independently of Rick. When Morty wants to do something, he develops a strategy for achieving it and executes that strategy effectively. He anticipates obstacles, prepares responses to potential problems, and adjusts his approach when circumstances change. This demonstrates strategic thinking and planning intelligence that Morty didn't show in earlier seasons. The development suggests that Morty has been learning from his experiences and developing capabilities that were always potentially present and are now becoming actualized through practice and experience. Morty's emotional intelligence also develops across the series. Early Morty is unable to recognize when he's being manipulated, and often believes obvious lies because he trusts people too readily. Later, Morty recognizes manipulation when it's happening, and responds more skeptically to claims that seem too good to be true. In the episode Never Ricking Morty from Season 4, Morty demonstrates awareness of narrative structures, and shows that he understands when situations don't make sense, or when explanations seem forced. This meta-awareness suggests developing critical thinking skills and the ability to question what he's being told rather than accepting it passively. The concept of Morty variance reveals that intelligence isn't fixed or predetermined. Different Mortys in different circumstances develop different forms of intelligence based on what their environments demand and what opportunities they have access to. A Morty who becomes a police officer develops investigative intelligence. A Morty who gets involved in politics develops political intelligence. A Morty who builds a business develops economic intelligence. The main Morty we follow is developing adventuring intelligence, which includes crisis management, quick thinking, and the ability to handle bizarre situations that most people couldn't even comprehend. Each form of intelligence is legitimate and valuable in its appropriate context. The show uses Morty's development to explore questions about nature versus nurture in intelligence. Is Morty naturally less intelligent than Rick, or has Morty simply never been given the opportunity to develop his potential? The variant suggests that environment and opportunity matter enormously. Mortys who are given responsibility and training develop competence and capability. Mortys who are kept subordinate and dependent remain anxious and uncertain. This pattern suggests that much of what we interpret as inherent intelligence, or lack thereof, is actually the result of circumstances, experiences, and opportunities that either support or inhibit the development of cognitive capabilities. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Individual variants show how different circumstances produce different forms of intelligence, and the next concept expands beyond individuals to explore what intelligence looks like when it's distributed across an entire organization. Section 9. The Citadel Collective. Distributed Multiversal Intelligence. The Citadel of Ricks represents a unique form of intelligence that emerges when thousands of versions of the smartest person in the universe come together to create a shared society and government. The Citadel isn't just a collection of individual Ricks living in the same place. It's a system where the combined knowledge, experience, and capabilities of infinite Ricks from different dimensions are pooled and organized into a functioning civilization. This creates a form of distributed intelligence that's different from individual genius because it involves coordination, communication, and collaboration between many minds working towards shared goals. The Citadel shows what happens when intelligence is scaled up from the individual level to the organizational level, and how that scaling creates both new capabilities and new problems. The Citadel first appears in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, which introduces the Council of Ricks as a governing body for Ricks across the multiverse. The episode establishes that the council was formed when Ricks from different dimensions realized they needed some kind of organization to manage conflicts between versions of themselves and to coordinate responses to multiversal threats. The creation of the council required Ricks to recognize that individual genius, no matter how extreme, has limitations when dealing with problems that span infinite dimensions. A single Rick can be the smartest person in his universe, and dealing with infinite universes requires organizational intelligence and collective action that goes beyond what any individual can accomplish alone. The formation of the Council demonstrates a type of intelligence that Rick C-137 often lacks, which is the ability to recognize when cooperation is more effective than individual action. Most Ricks are convinced that they're smarter than everyone else, and that they don't need help from anyone. The Ricks who formed the Council had to overcome this ego and arrogance to work together. They had to develop systems for making collective decisions, resolving disputes between equally intelligent individuals, and coordinating actions across infinite dimensions. This organizational intelligence is different from scientific intelligence because it requires understanding social dynamics, political structures, and how to build institutions that can function when everyone involved is a genius who thinks they should be in charge. The Council's ability to function at all represents a significant achievement in organizational design. When you bring together thousands of people who are all convinced they're the smartest person in existence, getting them to agree on anything should be nearly impossible. The Council has somehow created decision-making processes that allow them to reach consensus, or at least majority agreement on important issues. They've established procedures for debate, voting, and implementation of decisions. They've created positions of authority that other RICs accept as legitimate, despite each RIC's natural inclination to reject any authority above themselves. All of this requires sophisticated thinking about governance and institutional design. The episode The Ricklantis Mix-Up from Season 3 explores the Citadel in much greater depth and shows how it functions as a complete society with its own economy, government, culture, and social hierarchies. The Citadel has developed systems for everything from waste management to education to law enforcement. These systems represent collective intelligence because they're the result of many RICs contributing their knowledge and skills to solve problems that affect the entire community. The Citadel has infrastructure that no single RIC could build alone, including dimensional stabilizers, power generation facilities, transportation networks, and communication systems that operate across infinite realities. The infrastructure of the Citadel demonstrates planning and coordination at massive scales. The city has buildings designed to house thousands of Ricks and Mortys. It has transportation systems that move people efficiently around the city. It has power grids that provide energy to every building and facility. It has water and sewage systems that handle the waste from a large urban population. All of this infrastructure had to be designed, built, and maintained by teams of RICs working together over extended periods. The existence of this infrastructure shows that the Citadel can sustain long-term projects that require coordination between many different groups and that deliver benefits to the entire society. The way the Citadel organizes knowledge shows distributed intelligence in action. Different RICs specialize in different areas of science and technology. Some RICs focus on portal technology, while others work on biological sciences or dimensional physics or artificial intelligence. The Citadel has created systems for sharing research findings, coordinating experiments, and building on each other's discoveries. This means that the Citadel's collective scientific knowledge exceeds what any individual RIC knows, even though every RIC is individually brilliant. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts because organization and coordination allow for specialization and collaboration that amplify individual capabilities. The Citadel's research institutions represent intelligence about how to organize scientific inquiry at large scales. The Citadel presumably has laboratories, research facilities, and academic institutions where RICs conduct experiments and develop new technologies. These institutions have to manage resources, allocate funding, coordinate research agendas, and ensure that different research teams aren't duplicating each other's work unnecessarily. The Citadel has created systems that allow scientific knowledge to accumulate and build on itself over time, which is more efficient than having every RIC start from scratch and rediscover everything independently. The Citadel also demonstrates intelligence through its economic systems. The episode shows that the Citadel has a functioning economy with currency, businesses, employment, and markets. Creating an economy requires understanding how to coordinate production and distribution of goods and services across a large population. The Citadel has figured out how to assign value to different types of work, how to manage resource allocation, and how to create incentives that keep the system functioning. This economic intelligence is separate from scientific intelligence and requires understanding human behavior, social coordination, and how to design systems that align individual incentives with collective welfare. The economic system of the Citadel includes both legitimate businesses and, apparently, some level of corruption and black market activity. The existence of economic stratification with wealthy RICs and poor RICs shows that the Citadel's economy has created winners and losers, just like economies in regular societies. This suggests that the Citadel has not solved the fundamental economic problems of scarcity and distribution, despite being populated by geniuses. The economic intelligence that created the system was apparently not focused on equality or fairness, but rather on creating a functional market economy that allows for wealth accumulation and social mobility. The political system of the Citadel shows another dimension of collective intelligence. The Council of Ricks governs through some form of representative democracy or oligarchy, where different Ricks have different levels of power and influence. The episode The Ricklantis Mix-Up shows a presidential election happening on the Citadel, which means the political system includes mechanisms for peaceful transfer of power and democratic participation. Creating and maintaining these political institutions requires intelligence about governance, law, and how to manage power in ways that prevent constant conflict and chaos. The fact that thousands of egotistical geniuses can coexist in a relatively stable political system is itself an achievement that demonstrates organizational intelligence. The electoral system shown in the Ricklantis mix-up includes campaigns, debates, voting, and apparently some level of media coverage and public discourse about the candidates and their positions. This shows that the Citadel has developed democratic institutions similar to those in regular societies, complete with all the complexity and potential for manipulation that comes with electoral politics. The fact that evil Morty can run a successful campaign and win the presidency shows that the Citadel's political system is vulnerable to the same kinds of manipulation and deception that affect democracies everywhere. The system requires voters to make informed decisions, and voters can be misled by skilled politicians who know how to craft appealing messages. The Citadel's education system, shown in the Ricklantis mix-up, reveals how the society attempts to reproduce and transmit knowledge across generations. The schools on the Citadel teach young Ricks and Mortys the skills and knowledge they'll need to function in Citadel society. The existence of this educational system shows that the Citadel has thought about long-term sustainability and knowledge transfer. The schools have curricula, teachers, and pedagogical approaches designed to efficiently educate large numbers of students. This educational infrastructure represents collective thinking about how to preserve and expand the Citadel's knowledge base over time. The content of education on the Citadel appears designed to maintain the existing social order. Mortys are educated to be compliant workers who accept their subordinate position. Ricks are presumably educated to develop their scientific capabilities while also learning to function within Citadel society and accept its rules and norms. This shows that the Citadel's educational intelligence is being applied not just to transmit knowledge, but also to shape behavior and attitudes in ways that support the stability of the existing system. Education serves both enlightening and controlling functions within the society. The law enforcement system on the Citadel demonstrates intelligence about social control and order maintenance. The Citadel has police who investigate crimes, courts that adjudicate disputes, and presumably prisons or other mechanisms for punishment and rehabilitation. Creating a justice system requires intelligence about human behavior, social norms, and how to enforce rules in ways that maintain order without creating excessive oppression. The fact that Cop Morty and Cop Rick can conduct investigations and make arrests shows that the Citadel has developed legal procedures and institutional structures that allow for organized law enforcement, rather than just vigilante justice or personal vendettas. The justice system's ability to handle crimes committed by Ricks shows that the Citadel has figured out how to enforce rules even on people who are smart enough to evade most forms of accountability. The police have investigative techniques, forensic capabilities, and legal procedures that work, even when dealing with genius-level criminals. This suggests that the Citadel has devoted significant intelligence and resources to developing law enforcement capabilities that can function in a society of super-intelligent individuals who could potentially outsmart traditional policing methods. The Citadel's infrastructure shows practical intelligence applied at massive scale. The city has buildings, roads, power grids, water systems, and all the other physical infrastructure necessary to support a large population. Building and maintaining this infrastructure requires coordination between many different groups working on different aspects of the system. The Citadel has construction workers, engineers, maintenance crews, and administrators who keep everything functioning. This represents logistical and organizational intelligence about how to manage complex systems with many interdependent parts that all need to work together for the whole system to function properly. The episode also reveals social stratification within the Citadel, with some Ricks and Mortys having much more wealth and power than others. This inequality shows that the Citadel's intelligence is not equally distributed or equally accessible to everyone in the society. The existence of wealthy Ricks, working-class Ricks, and homeless Ricks demonstrates that the Citadel has recreated many of the same social and economic hierarchies that exist in regular societies. This raises questions about whether collective intelligence necessarily leads to fair or just outcomes, or whether intelligence can be organized in ways that benefit some members of society much more than others. The Citadel's ability to function across multiple dimensions shows sophisticated understanding of multiversal physics and dimensional mechanics. The Citadel exists in a pocket dimension, or stabilized section of the multiverse, where Ricks from infinite realities can gather and interact. Maintaining this dimensional stability requires constant monitoring and adjustment by teams of Ricks who understand how dimensional barriers work and how to prevent catastrophic dimensional collapse. This represents specialized technical knowledge applied to an ongoing, practical problem that affects everyone on the Citadel and that requires continuous attention and expertise to manage. The relationship between the Citadel and Rick C-137 reveals limitations in the Citadel's collective intelligence. Rick C-137 refuses to join the Citadel because he sees it as a betrayal of what makes Ricks special. He recognizes that the Citadel's collective intelligence comes at the cost of individual freedom and autonomy. The Citadel requires Ricks to follow rules, accept authority, and subordinate their individual genius to collective goals. Rick C-137's rejection of the Citadel shows that there is an inherent tension between individual intelligence and collective intelligence, and that scaling up from individual to organizational intelligence requires trade-offs and compromises that some individuals refuse to accept. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Collective intelligence organized into institutions and systems shows how knowledge can be pooled and coordinated across many minds. And another massive organization demonstrates how intelligence operates at bureaucratic scales across entire galaxies. Section 10. The Galactic Federation. Institutional Intelligence. The Galactic Federation represents intelligence expressed through massive bureaucratic organization that spans multiple planets and species across the galaxy. The Federation demonstrates how intelligence operates when scaled up to govern billions of beings across vast distances with complex administrative systems, military capabilities, and technological infrastructure. Unlike the Citadel, which is composed entirely of variants of the same person, the Federation coordinates intelligence across multiple species with different capabilities, cultures, and interests. This requires a different type of organizational intelligence focused on integration, standardization, and control across diverse populations that don't naturally share the same values or goals. The Galactic Federation first appears in the pilot episode when Rick and Morty encounter Federation bureaucrats, and the organization becomes a major antagonist in later episodes, particularly in Season 3. The Federation represents a galaxy-spanning government with the resources and organization to pose a genuine threat even to someone as intelligent as Rick. The fact that the Federation can capture Rick and nearly extract the portal gun formula from his mind shows that organizational intelligence and bureaucratic power can sometimes overcome individual genius. The Federation demonstrates that intelligence isn't just about having smart individuals. It's also about having systems and structures that can mobilize resources and coordinate actions at massive scales across time and space. The Federation's ability to capture Rick shows that they understand strategy and can plan operations that account for his capabilities. They don't try to outsmart Rick intellectually. Instead, they use overwhelming force, coordination, and patience to create situations where Rick's individual genius can't overcome their organizational advantages. They wait for opportunities when Rick is vulnerable. They deploy sufficient resources to ensure success. They have backup plans and contingencies. This strategic intelligence shows understanding of how to deal with opponents who are individually superior by using systemic advantages and coordinated action. The Federation's approach to Rick demonstrates institutional memory and learning. They clearly have records of Rick's past activities and have studied his patterns of behavior. They know what kind of threats he poses and what capabilities he possesses. They've analyzed his weaknesses and identified opportunities to exploit them. This intelligence gathering and analysis represents a form of collective learning, where the organization accumulates knowledge over time and uses that knowledge to improve its effectiveness. Individual Federation agents might not be as smart as Rick, and the organization as a whole can be smarter than any individual by pooling information and insights from many sources. The Federation's prison system, shown in the Rick Shank Rickdemption, demonstrates sophisticated intelligence about security, interrogation, and information extraction. The prison where they hold Rick uses advanced technology to create simulated realities inside Rick's mind, attempting to trick him into revealing the portal gun formula. This shows that the Federation understands psychology, neuroscience, and how to manipulate consciousness and memory. The prison also has multiple layers of physical and digital security designed to contain even the most dangerous criminals. Creating and operating this kind of facility requires intelligence about architecture, technology, and human behavior applied to the specific problem of imprisoning and interrogating highly capable individuals. The interrogation techniques the Federation uses reveal deep intelligence about cognitive science and deception. The agents interrogating Rick create an elaborate simulation designed to make Rick think he's in a safe environment where he can reveal information without consequences. They build a fake reality that includes Rick's supposed origin story, complete with emotional hooks designed to make Rick drop his guard. They understand that direct torture or threats might not work on someone like Rick, so they try manipulation and psychological warfare instead. The sophistication of this approach shows that the Federation has studied how minds work and has developed methods for extracting information from unwilling subjects who are smart enough to resist conventional interrogation. The way the simulation is constructed shows attention to detail and understanding of Rick's psychology. The Federation creates a fake memory of Rick's wife and daughter being killed, which they apparently believe will make Rick emotional enough to reveal his secrets. They staff the simulation with agents playing various roles, all coordinating to maintain the illusion. They have technology that can interface directly with Rick's brain and create convincing sensory experiences. All of this requires not just advanced neuroscience and technology, but also creative intelligence about how to construct believable scenarios that will manipulate someone who's naturally suspicious and analytical. The Federation's currency system plays a crucial role in the Rick Shank Rickdemption, when Rick destroys the Federation's economy by changing their currency value to zero. The fact that the Federation has a standardized currency used across multiple planets and species shows organizational intelligence about economics and governance. Creating a currency that works across different worlds with different resources and needs requires sophisticated understanding of economics, value, and exchange. The Federation has built financial systems, banking infrastructure, and economic regulations that allow for trade and commerce across their territory. This economic intelligence is necessary for maintaining a functioning multi-planet civilization where resources need to be allocated and economic activity needs to be coordinated. The existence of a galactic currency implies that the Federation has solved complex problems about how to maintain stable exchange rates across planets with vastly different economic conditions. They've presumably created central banking systems, monetary policy frameworks, and regulatory structures that prevent inflation and maintain confidence in the currency. They've integrated diverse planetary economies into a single economic system where goods and services can be traded freely across vast distances. This represents sophisticated economic thinking applied at scales that go far beyond anything that exists in normal human experience. The way Rick destroys the Federation's economy also reveals vulnerabilities in their system. The Federation's currency is apparently controlled through a central system that Rick can hack and manipulate once he gains access to it. This shows that while the Federation has built impressive infrastructure, they haven't adequately protected it against someone with Rick's level of technical capability. The Federation's intelligence, while considerable, is still inferior to Rick's genius in certain domains. The Federation built systems that work well under normal circumstances and collapse when faced with an opponent who understands those systems better than their creators do. The collapse of the Federation's economy shows that their entire civilization was built on economic foundations that had critical weaknesses. When the currency becomes worthless, the Federation can't quickly switch to alternative systems or maintain order through non-economic means. This suggests that the Federation's intelligence was focused on building efficient systems for normal operation, and they didn't invest enough in resilience, redundancy, or the ability to function when core systems fail. They built a powerful and extensive organization that was also brittle and vulnerable to catastrophic disruption. The Federation's military capabilities demonstrate intelligence about warfare, strategy, and force projection. The Federation has spacecraft, weapons, and military personnel capable of operating across multiple planets and dimensions. They can mount large-scale operations, coordinate attacks, and maintain occupation forces on conquered worlds. This military intelligence requires understanding logistics, command and control, tactics, and how to train and equip forces for diverse combat scenarios. The Federation's ability to threaten Earth Earth and actually occupy the planet shows that they can successfully execute complex military operations that require coordination across multiple levels of command and across vast distances. The Federation's military structure presumably includes hierarchies of command, specialized units for different types of missions, training programs for personnel, and logistical systems for supplying forces in the field. The fact that they can maintain military operations across multiple planets simultaneously shows that they've solved enormous logistical challenges about how to move troops and equipment, how to communicate across interstellar distances, and how to coordinate timing so that different units can support each other effectively. This represents institutional knowledge built up over time about how to conduct military operations at galactic scales. The military also demonstrates intelligence about adapting to different combat environments and adversaries. The Federation fights in space, on planetary surfaces, and presumably in various atmospheric and gravitational conditions. They face opponents with different technologies, tactics, and capabilities. Their military doctrine has to account for this diversity and provide frameworks that allow commanders to adapt to local conditions while maintaining coordination with broader strategic objectives. The Federation's occupation of Earth, briefly shown in Season 3, demonstrates intelligence about colonial administration and population control. The Federation imposes its authority on Earth, integrates Earth into its economic and political systems, and manages human resistance to occupation. This requires understanding how to govern conquered populations, how to extract resources and value from occupied territory, and how to maintain order in the face of opposition. The Federation has clearly done this before with other planets, and they've developed standard procedures and institutional knowledge about how to conduct successful occupations. The occupation shows that the Federation understands how to break resistance by making occupation seem inevitable and by offering benefits to collaborators. They presumably use a combination of military force, economic incentives, and propaganda to maintain control. They have systems for identifying and neutralizing resistance leaders. They have procedures for integrating conquered populations into their broader society. All of this requires both strategic intelligence about conquest and administrative intelligence about governance. The speed and efficiency with which the Federation occupies Earth suggests that they have detailed playbooks and standard operating procedures for conquest and occupation. They know what institutions to target first, how to establish control over communications and infrastructure, and how to present the occupation to the conquered population. This procedural knowledge represents collective intelligence accumulated over many previous conquests and formalized into institutional practices that can be applied consistently across different contexts. The Federation's approach to dealing with Rick specifically shows intelligence about threat assessment and resource allocation. The Federation recognizes that Rick is an exceptional danger who requires exceptional measures to contain. They devote significant resources to capturing him, interrogating him, and trying to extract his knowledge. They understand that the portal gun formula would give them capabilities they don't currently possess and will be worth almost any cost to obtain. This strategic intelligence about what knowledge is valuable and what links are justified to acquire it shows sophisticated thinking about technological development and competitive advantage. The Federation's communication and coordination systems allow them to function as a unified entity despite being spread across multiple planets and potentially multiple dimensions. They have systems for sending orders, reporting information, and coordinating actions across vast distances. These communication networks represent technical intelligence about faster-than-light communication or dimensional messaging, and they also represent organizational intelligence about how to structure information flow in a massive bureaucracy. The Federation has presumably developed standardized protocols, reporting requirements, and communication procedures that allow information to move efficiently through their organization. The Federation's technological capabilities show sustained investment in research and development across multiple scientific domains. They have faster-than-light travel, advanced weapons, dimensional technology, and sophisticated computer systems. Developing these technologies requires not just individual scientists making discoveries, and also institutional support for research, funding for development, and systems for translating research findings into practical applications. The Federation has created institutional structures that support ongoing technological advancement, and that can incorporate new discoveries into their military and administrative capabilities. The Federation's legal and administrative systems represent intelligence about how to create and enforce rules across diverse populations. The Federation has laws, courts, and enforcement mechanisms that operate across different species and cultures. Creating legal frameworks that function across such diversity requires sophisticated thinking about justice, legitimacy, and how to craft rules that different groups will accept as binding. The Federation has bureaucracies that process paperwork, track compliance, and manage the countless details involved in governing billions of beings across multiple planets. The Federation's response to Rick destroying their economy shows both the fragility of their systems and their lack of resilience in the face of catastrophic disruption. When Rick changes the currency value to zero, the entire Federation collapses almost immediately. This reveals that despite all their intelligence and capabilities, the Federation has created systems with single points of failure that can be exploited by someone who understands them well enough. The collapse also shows that the Federation's stability depends on maintaining certain economic and social conditions, and when those conditions disappear, the organization cannot quickly adapt or recover. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Bureaucratic intelligence shows how institutions coordinate power across galaxies. And one character demonstrates that intelligence can operate in realms beyond science and strategy by understanding the very structure of stories themselves. Section 11. Story Lord, Narrative Cognition, and Puzzle Intelligence. Story Lord represents a form of intelligence that operates on a completely different level from scientific genius or strategic planning. Story Lord understands narrative structure, metafictional concepts, and the underlying rules that govern how stories work. He doesn't just exist within stories, he comprehends the architecture of narrative itself and can manipulate those structures to achieve his goals. This makes Story Lord one of the most uniquely intelligent characters in Rick and Morty, because his intelligence operates in a domain that most characters don't even recognize exists. While Rick understands science and Evil Morty understands politics, Story Lord understands the fundamental nature of storytelling and how to exploit that understanding. Story Lord appears in the Season 4 episode Never Ricking Morty, which takes place almost entirely on a train that travels through different narrative structures and story conventions. The episode itself is structured as a meta-commentary on storytelling, and Story Lord serves as the antagonist who embodies intelligence about how narratives function. From his first appearance, Story Lord demonstrates that he understands concepts like plot structure, character arcs, narrative causality, and the difference between being a character in a story versus understanding that you're in a story. This meta-awareness gives him capabilities that other intelligent characters lack, because they're still operating within the story rather than understanding the story as a constructed thing. The train that Story Lord controls represents different types of narratives and storytelling conventions. Different train cars contain different story structures, from action sequences to flashbacks, to anthology formats, to commercial parody. Story Lord has created this train as a way to trap characters inside narrative loops and feed on the energy generated by their stories. This shows that Story Lord doesn't just understand narrative theory in an abstract way. He's figured out how to weaponize that understanding and create systems that exploit how stories work. He's built a machine that runs on narrative energy, which requires understanding stories as objects that can be analyzed, deconstructed, and utilized for specific purposes. The very concept of a story train powered by narrative energy demonstrates sophisticated intelligence about how fiction functions. Story Lord has identified that stories generate a kind of energy or force through their structure and emotional content. He's found a way to harvest that energy and use it to power his dimensional train. This requires thinking about narratives not just as sequences of events, but as phenomena that have measurable properties and effects. Story Lord has applied scientific thinking to the domain of storytelling itself, treating narratives as systems that can be studied, measured, and exploited. Story Lord's intelligence is evident in how he explains the train to Rick and Morty. He describes the train as operating on story logic rather than physical or scientific logic. Characters are trapped because they can't escape the narrative structures they're caught in. Every attempt to leave just creates another story that keeps them contained. Story Lord has created a system where the very act of trying to escape becomes part of the trap, because escape attempts are themselves narrative events that follow predictable patterns. This shows sophisticated understanding of recursion, self-reference, and how narrative conventions create expectations that can be exploited. The way Storylord talks reveals his intelligence about language, meaning, and communication. He speaks in ways that acknowledge the constructed nature of dialogue and characterization. He makes metatextual references that show he's aware of being a character in a television show. He understands that his words are being written by writers and that his actions are being animated by animators. This level of awareness represents a form of intelligence that transcends the normal boundaries between fiction and reality. Storylord has achieved a kind of cognitive breakthrough where he can perceive and operate on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Storylord's awareness of being fictional raises profound questions about consciousness and self-knowledge. He knows he's a character in a story, and he continues to function and pursue goals despite that knowledge. This suggests intelligence sophisticated enough to handle existential paradoxes that would paralyze most beings. Storylord has thought through what it means to be fictional, and has found ways to continue acting purposefully even within that framework. He's developed goals and motivations that make sense for a fictional being who understands his fictional nature. Storylord's plan in the episode shows strategic intelligence applied to narrative concepts. He's using the story train to collect narrative energy that he can use to break out of the Rick and Morty continuity entirely and enter other stories. He wants to escape the constraints of his own fictional existence by understanding the rules well enough to break them. This goal demonstrates intelligence about the nature of fictional reality and the possibility of transcending the limitations imposed by being a character in someone else's story. Storylord has identified a genuine problem, which is that fictional characters are bound by the decisions of their creators, and he's developed a plan to overcome that limitation. The ambition of Storylord's plan reveals intelligence about narrative hierarchy and the politics of fiction. He understands that some stories are more important than others, that some characters get more attention and development than others, and that being stuck in a single continuity limits your possibilities for existence and growth. He wants to become a character who can move between different stories and different fictional universes, which would give him a kind of immortality and freedom that most fictional beings can never achieve. This shows thinking about fiction as a landscape, with different territories and different levels of reality. The puzzles and challenges Storylord creates for Rick and Morty demonstrate his understanding of how to construct narrative problems. He doesn't just attack them directly. Instead, he creates situations that follow story logic and that can only be solved by understanding the narrative structures they're trapped in. When Rick and Morty try to use science or violence to escape, those approaches fail because they're not addressing the actual nature of the problem. The train operates on story rules, so escaping requires understanding and manipulating those rules rather than trying to override them with scientific knowledge or physical force. Storylord's intelligence is also shown through his awareness of narrative tropes and conventions. He can predict how characters will behave because he understands the storytelling patterns that govern character behavior in different types of stories. When Rick tries to be unpredictable, Storylord recognizes that unpredictability is itself a character trait that follows certain patterns. When Morty tries to have an emotional breakthrough, Storylord knows that emotional breakthroughs happen at specific points in story structure and can be anticipated and manipulated. This understanding of how narrative conventions shape behavior gives Storylord a form of predictive intelligence that works differently from scientific prediction or psychological profiling. The episode shows Storylord manipulating story structure in real time to maintain control over Rick and Morty. When they start to figure out the nature of the trap, he shifts them into different narrative modes that reset their progress. When they find a potential escape route, he introduces new story elements that complicate their situation. He's essentially writing and rewriting the story as it happens, using his understanding of how stories work to stay ahead of characters who are smarter than him in conventional ways. This demonstrates intelligence about improvisation, adaptation, and how to use structural knowledge to compensate for other limitations. Storylord's ability to rewrite narratives in real time shows he's operating like an author or director within his own domain. He can introduce new characters, change settings, alter plot developments, and shift genre conventions, all to maintain his control over the situation. This creative intelligence about storytelling gives him powers that resemble what writers and creators have over their fictional worlds. Storylord has figured out how to claim some of that creator-level authority for himself as a character, which represents a radical transgression of the normal boundaries between creators and creations. Storylord's relationship with the concept of canon reveals another dimension of his intelligence. He understands that some stories are considered canonical and important, while others are dismissed as non-canonical or filler. He knows that being part of the main continuity gives a story more reality and permanence within the fictional universe. His plan to escape into other stories shows that he's thought about the hierarchy of narratives and wants to move from being a character in what might be considered a one-off episode to having more substantial existence across multiple stories. This shows intelligence about fictional ontology and the politics of storytelling. The way Rick eventually defeats Story-Lord demonstrates that while Story-Lord's intelligence is sophisticated, it has limitations. Rick realizes that the train operates on story logic, and that the way to escape is to create a story that breaks the train's ability to sustain itself. Rick and Morty deliberately create a confusing, contradictory, poorly structured story that doesn't follow normal narrative rules. This bad storytelling destabilizes the train's systems because the train depends on coherent narrative energy to function. When fed narrative chaos and incomprehensible plot developments, the train can't process the information and begins to fail. Story-Lord's intelligence is ultimately bounded by his commitment to understanding and working within narrative structures. He's so focused on how stories work that he can't handle a situation where the rules are deliberately broken in ways that create narrative nonsense. This shows that even highly specialized intelligence has blind spots. Story-Lord is brilliant at understanding conventional storytelling, and he struggles when faced with unconventional storytelling that deliberately violates the patterns he's mastered. His intelligence is deep in one domain, and that specialization becomes a vulnerability when the domain itself is undermined. The episode uses Story-Lord to explore questions about the nature of intelligence in fictional contexts. Can a character be intelligent about the fact that they're fictional? What does it mean to understand narrative structure from inside a narrative? Story-Lord represents the possibility that fictional characters could develop awareness of their fictional nature and intelligence about how fiction works. This raises philosophical questions about consciousness, self-awareness, and whether understanding the constructed nature of your reality makes you more or less real. Story-Lord also demonstrates intelligence about audience expectations and metatextual communication. He seems to understand that Rick and Morty has an audience watching the show, and he makes references that only make sense if you recognize that the show is a television program with writers, animators, and viewers. This audience awareness shows intelligence that operates outside the boundaries of the fictional world. Story-Lord can think about the show from the perspective of someone who understands it as a cultural artifact, rather than just experiencing it as his reality. The puzzles Story-Lord creates throughout the episode reveal intelligence about game design and problem solving. Each challenge he presents has a logical solution that requires understanding the specific narrative rules governing that part of the train. These aren't arbitrary obstacles. They're carefully designed tests that force characters to demonstrate comprehension of storytelling principles. Story-Lord has created an environment that functions as both a prison and a teaching machine, showing his ability to design systems that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Story-Lord's dialogue demonstrates linguistic intelligence and understanding of how language creates meaning. He plays with words, references concepts from narrative theory, and speaks in ways that acknowledge multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. His communication style shows that he's thinking about language as a tool for constructing reality rather than just describing it. He understands that in a fictional world, language doesn't just represent things, it creates them. When a character says something in a story, that statement becomes part of the fictional reality in ways that don't work in real life. The character design and presentation of Story-Lord support his intelligence about narratives. He appears as a floating head in a book, which is a visual representation of his nature as a being who exists in stories rather than in physical reality. His appearance constantly reminds viewers that he's operating on a different ontological level from characters who have bodies and exist in space. This visual intelligence about self-presentation shows that Story-Lord understands symbolism and how to use visual metaphors to communicate his nature and capabilities. Story-Lord's ultimate fate in the episode shows the consequences of his intelligence. He's defeated when Rick and Morty break his system by creating narrative chaos, and his understanding of stories isn't enough to help him adapt to storytelling that deliberately rejects structure and coherence. This demonstrates that intelligence specialized in understanding systems can be vulnerable to attacks that target the foundations of those systems. Story-Lord built his entire approach around assuming that stories follow certain rules, and when those rules are abandoned, his intelligence becomes less relevant. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Understanding narrative structure represents one unique form of genius, and the final character we'll examine demonstrates intelligence pushed to its absolute limit through mastery of science, strategy, and survival across infinite realities. Section 12. Rick Prime, the most extreme brain in the multiverse. Rick Prime represents the ultimate expression of intelligence in Rick and Morty. While Rick C137 is established as the smartest person in the central finite curve, Rick Prime is the Rick who killed Rick C137's family, and who exists as a target and rival throughout the series. Rick Prime demonstrates intelligence that matches or potentially exceeds Rick C137's capabilities in every domain. He's mastered dimensional travel, created devastating weapons, manipulated multiversal events to serve his goals, and stayed ahead of Rick C137's pursuit for decades. Rick Prime shows what happens when someone with Rick's level of genius uses that intelligence without any emotional attachments or moral constraints holding them back. Rick Prime first appears in the backstory revealed in the Season 3 premiere, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, though the show doesn't fully explain his significance until later seasons. The episode shows a younger Rick C137 being approached by another Rick who offers to share portal technology. Rick C137 refuses the offer, wanting to live a normal life with his wife and daughter. The other Rick responds to this rejection by dropping a bomb through a portal into Rick C137's garage, killing his wife and daughter. This Rick is later revealed to be Rick Prime, and this single act demonstrates his willingness to use extreme violence to punish anyone who rejects what he considers the obvious superiority of the Rick lifestyle. The bomb that Rick Prime uses shows sophisticated understanding of dimensional mechanics and strategic thinking. He doesn't try to argue with Rick C137 or persuade him to change his mind. He simply eliminates the family that's keeping Rick C137 from embracing his full potential as a genius. This shows intelligence about motivation and psychology. Rick Prime understands that Rick C137 won't join him voluntarily while he has emotional attachments, so he removes those attachments through violence. This is coldly rational and strategically effective, even though it's morally horrifying. Rick Prime demonstrates intelligence unconstrained by empathy or ethical considerations. The act of killing Rick C137's family reveals Rick Prime's intelligence about causality and long-term consequences. He must have known that this action would create an enemy who would hunt him for the rest of his existence. Rick Prime accepted this consequence and proceeded anyway, which suggests he either believed he could stay ahead of Rick C137 indefinitely, or he simply didn't care about being hunted. Either interpretation shows a different form of intelligence. If he believed he could evade Rick C137 forever, that shows confidence in his own capabilities and understanding of how to hide across infinite dimensions. If he didn't care about the consequences, that shows a kind of nihilistic intelligence that has moved beyond caring about personal safety or survival. The Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, provides more information about Rick Prime and his role in creating the central finite curve. The episode reveals that after killing Rick C137's family, Rick Prime helped establish the system that walls off the parts of the multiverse where Rick is always the smartest person. Rick Prime was apparently instrumental in creating this structure, which shows intelligence about multiversal politics and organization. He helped build a system that ensures Rick's superiority across infinite dimensions, which requires understanding how to manipulate reality at scales that go beyond anything most characters can comprehend. Rick Prime's involvement in creating the central finite curve demonstrates strategic intelligence about power and control. By helping to establish a section of the multiverse where Rick is guaranteed to be the smartest being, Rick Prime ensured that he would always operate in an environment where his intelligence gives him maximum advantage. He didn't just want to be smart. He wanted to construct reality so that being smart in the specific ways he's smart would guarantee dominance. This shows intelligence about system design and about creating environmental conditions that favor your particular capabilities. The creation of the central finite curve also shows intelligence about collaboration and politics. Rick Prime had to work with other Ricks to create this structure, which means he had to navigate the egos and agendas of beings who are all equally convinced of their own superiority. He had to build consensus, coordinate efforts, and maintain alliances long enough to complete the project. This demonstrates social and political intelligence that goes beyond pure scientific genius. Rick Prime can work with others when it serves his purposes, even though his ultimate loyalties are only to himself. The fact that Rick Prime has successfully hidden from Rick C-137 for decades shows intelligence about evasion, misdirection, and covering his tracks. Rick C-137 has been hunting Rick Prime since his family was killed, using all of his scientific genius and all of his resources to track down the Rick responsible. Rick Prime has stayed ahead of this pursuit while presumably continuing to operate across the multiverse and pursue his own goals. This requires intelligence about security, anonymity, and how to avoid detection by someone who's equally intelligent and highly motivated to find you. Rick Prime's ability to evade Rick C-137 shows understanding of how Rick C-137 thinks and what methods he'll use to track someone. Rick Prime has to constantly anticipate what Rick C-137 will try next, what clues he might follow, and what traps he might set. This requires modeling Rick C-137's thought processes and staying at least one step ahead at all times. The fact that Rick Prime can successfully predict and counter Rick C-137's moves shows that his intelligence is at minimum equal to Rick C-137's and possibly superior in certain domains like strategic thinking and long-term planning. The evasion also shows patience and discipline. Rick Prime has to maintain operational security across decades, never making mistakes that would reveal his location or activities. He can't indulge in behaviors that would create patterns Rick C-137 could recognize. He has to constantly monitor for signs that Rick C-137 is getting close and adjust his activities accordingly. This sustained vigilance over such long periods requires intelligence about risk management and the ability to maintain focus on long-term goals while handling day-to-day challenges. The Season 6 finale, Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation, reveals more about Rick Prime's current activities and capabilities. The episode shows that Rick Prime has developed technology and weapons that even Rick C-137 hasn't created. He has unique inventions, different approaches to solving problems, and capabilities that surprise Rick C-137 despite all his knowledge and experience. This demonstrates that Rick Prime isn't just following the same path of scientific development as other Ricks. He's exploring different avenues of research and discovering things that other Ricks haven't found. Rick Prime's technology shows creative intelligence and willingness to pursue ideas that other Ricks might consider too dangerous or too unethical. He's apparently unconstrained by any sense of responsibility about what he creates or how it might be used. This lack of ethical limitation means Rick Prime can pursue any line of research that interests him without worrying about consequences or collateral damage. This doesn't make him morally superior, and it does make him scientifically more productive in certain ways, because he's not filtering his research through any ethical framework. The confrontation between Rick C-137 and Rick Prime in Season 6 shows that they're evenly matched in terms of intelligence and capability. When they finally face each other directly, neither one has a decisive advantage. They understand each other's tactics, predict each other's moves, and counter each other's strategies in real time. The fight demonstrates two equally brilliant minds engaged in the contest where conventional measures of intelligence aren't enough to determine a winner. The outcome depends on factors beyond pure intelligence, including determination, luck, and circumstance. Rick Prime's dialogue and behavior reveal someone who's fully embraced the nihilistic implications of infinite dimensions and infinite possibilities. He speaks and acts like someone who's thought deeply about what it means to be the smartest person in infinite universes, and who's concluded that nothing matters except exercising his capabilities to their fullest extent. This philosophical intelligence, while disturbing, shows sophisticated thinking about meaning, purpose, and how to respond to existential questions about the nature of reality. Rick Prime has arrived at answers that allow him to function without emotional attachments or moral constraints. Rick Prime's philosophy demonstrates intelligence about existential questions and how to construct meaning in a meaningless universe. He's apparently decided that in a multiverse where everything that can happen does happen somewhere, the only thing that matters is exercising your capabilities to their fullest extent. This conclusion, while bleak, shows logical thinking about the implications of infinite realities. If everything is possible and everything exists somewhere, then traditional concepts of morality and meaning break down. Rick Prime has thought through these implications and constructed a worldview that allows him to function within that framework. Rick Prime's relationship with his own family shows intelligence about emotional manipulation and using relationships strategically. Unlike Rick C-137, who abandoned his family but still maintains some connection with them, Rick Prime appears to have completely severed any emotional ties to his Beth and his descendants. This could represent intelligence about recognizing and eliminating weaknesses, or it could represent a fundamental failure of emotional intelligence. The show leaves this question open, suggesting that there might be different, valid interpretations of what it means to be intelligent about relationships and emotions. The way Rick Prime has structured his life shows intelligence about resource management and prioritization. He's apparently devoted his existence to pursuing scientific knowledge and experiencing everything the multiverse has to offer, without being constrained by attachments or responsibilities. This single-minded focus has allowed him to achieve things that Rick C-137 hasn't achieved, because Rick C-137 is still partially constrained by his connections to Morty, Beth, and the rest of the family. Rick Prime demonstrates what happens when intelligence is focused entirely on its own development and expression, without any competing priorities. Rick Prime's impact on the show's mythology demonstrates intelligence about creating lasting effects that shape reality for countless others. The murder of Rick C-137's family set in motion the entire series of events that defines Rick C-137's character and motivations. Rick Prime's actions created the version of Rick that we've been following throughout the series. This shows intelligence about causality and how single actions can have cascading effects across time and dimensions. Rick Prime changed the multiverse by changing Rick C-137, and that change rippled out to affect countless other lives. The show's portrayal of Rick Prime raises questions about whether there's a ceiling to intelligence, or whether intelligence can continue developing infinitely. Rick Prime represents what might be close to the maximum possible intelligence that can exist within the laws of physics as they're understood in the Rick and Morty universe. He's mastered dimensional travel, understood multiversal structure, created devastating weapons, and achieved everything that a mind of his capabilities can achieve. The question becomes whether there's anything beyond this level of intelligence, or whether Rick Prime represents the ultimate expression of what intelligence can be. Rick Prime also demonstrates intelligence about survival and self-preservation. Despite being hunted by Rick C-137 and potentially other enemies across the multiverse, Rick Prime has survived for decades and continued pursuing his goals. He's avoided traps, escaped dangerous situations, and maintained his freedom and autonomy despite being one of the most wanted individuals across infinite dimensions. This survival intelligence shows understanding of threat assessment, risk management, and how to operate in hostile environments where numerous powerful entities want you dead or captured. The dynamic between Rick C-137 and Rick Prime shows that intelligence alone doesn't determine outcomes when two equally intelligent beings come into conflict. Other factors matter, including determination, emotional investment, allies, resources, and circumstance. Rick C-137 has the advantage of caring about revenge and being emotionally invested in catching Rick Prime. Rick Prime has the advantage of not caring and being willing to abandon anything that becomes inconvenient. These different approaches to life, both of which can be defended as intelligent responses to existential questions, create different strengths and weaknesses that determine how their conflict unfolds. Rick Prime represents the show's ultimate exploration of what intelligence means and what it can accomplish. He's achieved maximum scientific knowledge, created incredible technology, understood multiversal structure, escaped every constraint, and lived exactly as he chooses without compromise. He's also completely isolated, emotionally dead, and unable to form genuine connections with anyone. The show uses Rick Prime to ask whether this represents the apex of intelligence, or whether it represents a kind of intelligence that's succeeded in every measurable way while failing at something fundamental about what makes existence meaningful. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.